Well, it's a great, great honor. I mean, you rarely see me sitting around with these things in an interview, but with the man we're really pleased to welcome here today. There's just so much to go through that we wanted to make absolutely sure that we're not missing any vital parts. And, well, he's the man, apart from classic quotes like, "I'm Bob," and we really have to hear this one from your end. And I'm really, really tired of doing this, guys.
That's funny. I remember that.
Okay, before we get into this, I mean, the man, well, as the Roots put it, coming to New York to mix, going to Bob Powell, with the snares and the kicks, and so on and so on. I mean, he's quoted all over. I guess there's not a single person in this room who doesn't have his name on at least 10 records at his home. If so, show up later, and we'll sort you out. Somehow involved in The Roots, Tribe Called Quest, That's the Sonic, Dilla Soul, Erykah Badu, D'Angelo, you name it. And yeah, give a big hand to Mr.
Hi. I'm going to say something that may make me a little bit unpopular, but can you guys hear me okay? If you could, if there's any smokers in the room, if you could smoke outside. The rest of you will like that, I know. It's very funny because in the States now, things are so different that... And I was in Seattle recently. I live in New York. And we always think of New York as the place you can do anything, and it's cool. But you can't smoke in public places in New York now. And I went to Seattle, which is maybe the most progressive city in the universe. They treat the homeless as a political force in Seattle. It's crazy. But you can still smoke in the bars there. It was wild. But anyway, I'm happy to be on the continent, and I'm happy to be with the smoke. But if you would not hear, that's great.
How do you enforce such a verdict in your studio?
That's it. Two things. Number one, pretty much, other than weed, most of the artists I work with don't smoke, and not even weed that much. And I have these great excuses. I can always say, number one, very bad for the gear, very bad for the equipment. And my other excuse for a lot of things is if you do that in here, I won't last that long, and your record won't sound that good. And, you know, it's very interesting. I have, a lot of people ask me, because I've worked with a lot of different people, and I survived Wu-Tang, which if you know Wu-Tang, you understand. And, you know, Amir once, Questlove once said to me, he said, you know, you're the only person in the world that doesn't have a horror story about, you know, working with this artist or that artist, and they pulled steel on me, and they did this, and they did that. If people know that you're really there to help them and help do their thing and not yours, that's the best passport in the world to a lot of different people. And it's a very interesting point, which actually colors everything I think we do. There may be a lot of people here who work by themselves in the studio, and I think at one point or another we all do. But at the same time, a skill that you can actually work on, just like every other skill, that people forget about many times is your attitude. And this, we'll get back to this during a lot of other things, but that's a very, very interesting thing about how I get people not to do that stuff. If people know that you're there for their best interests, it's amazing what that does. And
does it even apply to playing mafia weddings in Bensonhurst?
It applies to playing mafia weddings at Bensonhurst. He must have been on my website. On my website, bobpower.com, and I only say that, I have no sponsors, but it's a really fun place to go. There's a lot of hidden stuff, too. There's all sorts of objects that don't say that, but if you touch them, they take you to different places. There is a timeline of my life. I didn't feel like doing a traditional CV or resume, but there's a little timeline. And among other things, for me, I was a working guitar player and arranger for a long, long time. And like every musician in the world, it doesn't matter how good you are. You do what in New York is called club dates, which is basically...
is called or was called?
Is. And club dates you would think is music in a club, but it's not. On the West Coast, they call them casuals. And basically, you put a tuxedo on and you go play someone's wedding or bar mitzvah or confirmation or something, or anniversary party. And it's a funny thing. When I still wanted to be a player all the time, one of the things that convinced me that maybe there was no there. I mean, I wanted to be the world's most famous studio musician. And I say this on purpose because one time I went to a club date in a tuxedo, and Bernard, who you may have seen the other day, was playing drums. And it really was a great education into and I was in my 30s already, but it was an incredible education into Gertrude Stein said there is no there, meaning, you know, when you're a musician, you do a gig, and sometimes it's a great gig, and sometimes it's a mafia wedding in Bensonhurst, you know, for $90, but that's the way it is. You know.
So, where's your affection from Gertrude Stein coming from then?
One of my favorite quotes about everyone's favorite quote. Do you know Oakland, across from San Francisco? Gertrude Stein was commenting on the fact that Oakland has no soul. To her, it didn't. I think it does. But, and she said, there is no there, which I love. My favorite.
Well, probably to fill in those who might, you know, have your name on somewhere on the shelves back home, you're credited with a lot of different things on these albums. And credits, I mean, you know, there's zillions of sayings about getting credit and credit to whom credit is due and whatnot. Who are all these different people, all these different roles, and who gets credited for what? And what does it mean in the reality of studio life?
How many people here are part of a production team when you make music? How many people work totally by themselves, no matter what? Really? That's a high number. That's interesting. You know, what Torsten is referencing to is sort of who does what job in the studio and how that is credited and maybe where those lines cross. In the States, and I'm sure here too, there's a fairly specific hierarchy of who does what in the studio. You guys can hear over there okay? Every time I turn my head, I go off mic. That's a very engineer's thing to think. I always want to keep this in front of me. After years of saying to MCs, no, stay on the mic. You know, Common sits there with his eyes closed, goes like this. I said, no, stay up there. Anyway.
Can you finally show us how to do it, or will we do that later on stage?
You don't want to see me. That's an interesting point, and I'll get back to that. But if any of you engineer, it's your responsibility for two things. Number one, educate your clients. You know, don't say, listen, man, you really got to stay on the mic. Listen, man, no. Educate them into how microphones work, and that's a big, big issue. And then it's really incumbent upon you as the engineer to make their shit work the way that they want to do it, not the way that you want to do it. Okay? So both those things seem like a contradiction, but they're both true. Anyway, in the States, there's a fairly well-defined hierarchy of studio personnel. Just because it's a hierarchy, it doesn't mean that someone's more important than anyone else, but a lot of people see it that way anyway. In the studio itself, there's usually the studio assistant who is supplied by the studio that you hire. As rooms get more sophisticated, that's more and more important. Rooms become more standardized, and if you're in an all SSLs work the same way, but to have someone there who really knows, and all of you know this, who really knows the idiosyncrasies of the different rooms is tremendously important. And in fact, if I'm going to a new place to mix or to track, I always say, give me your best assistant. Not because I don't want to get out of the chair, but I want someone to be honest with me and say, you know what, that corner of the room doesn't sound very good. And that's fine. I don't hate the room then. I'm just going to be able to do my shit better. So the studio assistant is supplied by the studio, and they are responsible for setting up in front of the session. If everybody's really familiar with this, tell me, because I'll move on. It's okay? So the studio assistant sets up for the session, so makes sure that they know where everything is in the studio. They call for Chinese food when the artist wants Chinese food. Unfortunately, most of the time, they clean up the Chinese food off the floor. You know, studio assistants work harder than anybody else. They get there an hour early. They leave 2 hours late. They document everything you do on the session, or they should. How many of you are familiar with the idea of recall on a session, or total recall? Anybody not know that term? Okay. Recall is when you either have the computer memorize or write down on a piece of paper every setting in the whole studio, so that in theory, if you need to come back and redo something, it'll be exactly the same. It never is. It never is. But in theory, that's the deal. Then
It's a big part for conspiracy as well, because with people talking about, oh, he recalled my stuff, and
oh, that's such bullshit. Remind me of that, because I read something. Do you guys know gearsluts.com? It's a great, gearslutz.com. It's a bunch of geeks who have nothing better to do than be in the studio all day and then go home and write about it. And I got a life too, but sometimes late at night I got nothing to do. I'll be zipping through this stuff. But remind me about that, because that's a really interesting thing. Anyway, then you have the engineer, who is usually hired by the band or by the band's management. They get paid either by the record label, by the band's manager, by the band, or not at all, which is another issue that if you guys are working engineers, that's a whole issue that's very important. Then the artist, and usually that's a person that's on the microphone or on an instrument, and the producer, and many times that's the artist. Sometimes it's the person who's engineering. Sometimes, and this is another interesting thing that I'll get back to, is the role of the producer. Actually, I guess I've gone through everybody. Then you have friends and relatives, who, I gotta say, everybody should be comfortable, but generally in terms of the workflow, there's no reason for anybody to be in the studio other than the people that are doing the work.
how does that apply to the posse?
You know, if someone's more comfortable with an audience, that's one thing. But it's sort of like drugs in the studio. And you know, I've been everywhere. I am a former, and you know, I know what's going on. I generally find, and for some people this is not true, I generally find that drugs don't make things go better in the studio, they make things go worse. And I don't care, you know, and there's some people who are different, you know. There's some people I know who function much better smoking weed from the minute they get up to the minute they go to sleep. And that's fine. But for 98% of the other things, it just ends up making shit go a little bit slower. And the same thing...
A little bit is a really chewing gum.
Time becomes elastic. The other thing is, and this is interesting too, because a lot of people's hours are very, very different. But in general, this is Power's Law of Production number 93. I find that after midnight, even if you always work all night, many times after midnight, efficiency tends to take a dive. And it doesn't mean that you don't get anything done, and it doesn't mean you don't get good stuff done, because sometimes you get the best stuff done. But sort of just how quickly things move forward tends to go down. Anyway, let me get back to producer, because this is a really interesting one. Like many things in general, culture, language, many things. Hip-hop has redefined a lot of things about our culture and about our shared culture. And it definitely has redefined language. It's redefined ways of dressing. Unfortunately, it many times has redefined ways of walking, which I'm not so down with, but that's cool. And it has redefined the term producer, which is really interesting. Someone asked me, I had been scoring TV, doing the scores for TV music in the late 70s. And I was still playing every night, different kinds of gigs, and I was doing a lot of jazz, and basically I had some good gigs scoring television, which was paying for my jazz career. And I went down to Hollywood and visited this really big television composer that I knew through somebody else. And he said, I was doing a lot of different things, and he said, what do you really want to do? And I said, well, I really want to produce records. And he looked at me, didn't skip a beat, and said, well, all you really need to produce records is money. So but it's not untrue. But anyway, the role of a producer is really interesting. Some producers know music inside and out. Some producers don't know a note of music, and they're incredible producers. Some producers just have money. Some producers know music, but not in traditional ways. Some producers, as many times in hip-hop, are beat creators. These and all combinations of these have become very valid concepts of what a producer does. And it's fascinating. You know, a lot of old school musicians, and again, because hip-hop was really the fulcrum, the point at which a lot of things changed about popular music and how it's made. A lot of old school people, including engineers, got really resentful when hip-hop came around because they say, oh, A, this isn't music, B, that's not the right way to do things, C, they don't know about X, Y, Z, so they don't deserve this and shit like that. Fuck that. It's interesting now how the concept of producer takes so many different avenues and pieces of those. I also find that in the modern world, and really in the age in the digital age, an age of communications, there are not so many people anymore who say, well, I just make beats on my MP and that's all I want to know. You know, everybody has come to a new consciousness. I made a note about this. Torsten was talking to me before about some ideas of what to cover. And one of the things that I wrote and I marked and marked and marked is a lot of times, especially in a studio environment, but sometimes in a cultural thing where we may be unsure of ourselves, or don't sacrifice intelligence for being down. You know, a lot of times, and it's really weird. Like
exclamation mark?
Yeah, man, big time. I talk to people a fair amount. I love to talk. And I had a couple of espressos and I just go. But I joke when I first get up in front of an audience because he mentioned my discography, and it seems like the first thing that happens when I walk into a room full of people is everybody leans over and going like this to the person next to them, and what they're really saying is, oh shit, he's white. You know, but that gets me to a really important thing about.
I mean, on that song with that quote with I'm Bob, blah, 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 wasn't Parson New saying something out, I'm a modern day slave or something like that?
Yeah, I don't even remember, to tell you the truth. I'm not good with lyrics. I can hear a song.
But I mean, that was a big issue, right? It's like you have the white guys in the chair of command.
That's a whole nother issue. But and I'll go to that real quickly. But basically, as briefly as I can be, and we may get back to this, don't be yourself. Show your intelligence, educate the people around you, share your knowledge, and give all that kind of stuff, and you don't have to worry about anything, man. Everything will come exactly not exactly how you want it, because nothing's like that, but all the good stuff goes around. There's an interesting point about, you know, the record-making process. I feel like Black, brown, and women people are very underrepresented in engineering. In the States, there's a bunch of very long-term cultural reasons, perhaps why, that we don't have to go, we don't have the time. But I really feel like those groups of people are very underrepresented on the technical side. That said, a very interesting thing is happening. The technical side has become democratized. You know, I say about MIDI many times, MIDI was so revolutionary because all of a sudden you didn't have to be a trained musician in order to make really incredible music. It was all about how your imagination is and how well you know your tools. In a way, digital technology and computer-based recording has done the same thing for engineering. It has democratized engineering. You don't need all the materials and tools are there. You know, you can buy a little digital recorder, a multi-track recorder now for, let's just use a BS 1680 or a 2480, whatever those rolling things are now. With, you know, if 10 or 15 years ago you would have said to someone, well, you can get something that sits on your lap that is a multi-track digital recorder that is also a multi-track digital mixer that has all these wild effects. It doesn't matter how good or bad the thing sounds, but all this stuff, they would have said, wow. And back in the day, it was a synclavier that did that. And they cost $150,000. And it's just an amazing thing to think, wow, you know, 10, 15 years ago, people wouldn't have even been able to conceive of this stuff, much say it costs $2,000 and it sits in your lap. But that also gets to the thing about the knowledge is there. How to use a microphone. There's thousands of places on the internet you can go and learn that. The finer points come with doing it a lot and finding more information. How, you know, to get the $400 or $500 to buy a little digital recorder or buy a computer and get some software-based recording, you know, you work for a while, you save your money, you got the dough. So in a very interesting way, the technology has leveled the field for everybody. That still doesn't mean that the machine of the record companies and promotion has changed anything. And in truth, when you get down to it, money rules everything. You know, money is what motivates the record companies. I don't mean that they're bad people, but they're companies, they're corporations. Unfortunately, the big issue when it comes to doing it yourself, which is what I think a lot of us are doing, is money still rules visibility and money rules promotion. But that's another deal, and we'll get to that. You know, but on a traditional side, you know, I really feel that in the States at least, African Americans, Latinos, and women are very, very underrepresented on the engineering side. Who the fuck knows why anymore, you know? But definitely it's that way.
But how do you feel personally as someone who's, I mean, there's people who refuse recording records without you, which are obviously way beyond the race issue. How is it in a professional working environment?
What, issues dealing with race?
Yeah.
Well, it's never been an issue with me. That's just, I am sort of a multiculturalist with music. I've been playing in funk bands since I was a kid. So with me, it's not an issue. People, and it goes back to what I was saying before, it doesn't matter who you're working with or what their thing is. People respond to your positive energy and what you are able to give to them. And they will give stuff back to you if you can put out enough of that stuff. And it's pretty clear right away whether that line of communication is open. And you know what? If you're doing that and people don't respond, then money aside, maybe it's not the right people for you to be working with. And that happens too. For me, fortunately, I have enough clients that if the vibe isn't right, and if it seems like we're, you know, working in different directions, that's cool, man. I will find them someone else who can help them. And it's not an ego thing. It's not like, well, I got to go home at 12 o'clock, or if you're getting fucked up in the back room, I'm not going to be here. It's not about that at all. It's about, are we sort of in the same mindset, and are we focused on doing the same thing, which generally is making great music. So yeah, it hasn't really been an issue.
How's the actual process looking? Of how do you find that out? Is there, on that level, preparational meetings, or do you just go in there and see if it works out, and if not, company is going to take up the check?
As a producer, I spend a lot of time with people before I decide to work with them. That relationship for me is a very intimate one, and I end up spending another power law. If there's a way of taking a task that's simple and straightforward and turning it into something very long and complicated, I will find it. It's a bad thing, but I sort of try to look at things from a lot of different directions. So as a producer, I think it's pretty important that you spend time with your artist first.
Meaning?
Learning who they are musically, what they want, and a big, big issue is what the artist wants versus what the record company wants. Giant issue. Like, I will tell you so many times, people get signed and the record company says, God, I really love what you do. I love what you do. And the artist feels great. Because all artists are the same. I don't care how experienced they are, how many props they have, how many awards they have. Every artist in the world lives for people saying, you know what, I really like what you do. And not tripping in a weird way and, doing all these plays like, what can I get for you? I mean, if the artist is an asshole, that's what they need. What can I get for you? Do you want some tea now? But, most everybody really wants to be told just by another human being, thank you, I really, really like what you do. So record companies will say that, and they send you limousines, and they give you an iPod, and all this nice shit. And in the back of their minds, generally, they're thinking, oh, good, if I can only get them to do this. Now, most of the time, this is not that different from what you do. Especially experienced A&R people really know what's going on. They do know that it's really about the artists and their artistry, and you cannot be successful or be successful for very long changing that much about an artist. What you can do, and what I try to do as a producer, and a mixer for that matter, is make people more of what they are. Find the really good things and the unique things about what they do. And if you think back to, at least for me, a lot of artists who I've worked with and been fortunate enough to come together with, they're very unique. D'Angelo has certain ways of playing and singing that are like no one else. Erykah Badu, Jesus Christ, you hear one note come out of her mouth and you know that it's not somebody else. And in a way, that's one of the things that I think we all respond to, and record companies especially, is uniqueness. But anyway, record companies are always signing people for one thing and hoping they can get them to do another. And trust me, and I try to educate early young artists to this, keep straight about what you do. Keep straight about the fact that you're an artist. It's funny, I get the same thing, and I've been doing this a long time. If I'm at the studio, I don't subscribe to Billboard. If I'm at the studio and I start reading Billboard, and it shows so-and-so with Clive Davis with their arm around them, and it shows so-and-so with Martin Bandier shaking their hand, you start to think, wow, I got to do more of that stuff. And, it's really most important that you are an artist, that you do what you do, that you show some respect for yourself in that, and you show the people around you some love and respect. And everything else follows that. So if you are an artist, and if you guys are in the position of at some point having a record label say, God, we love what you do, remember what I said, and it's not like you have to play it or play the label or anything, but you got to just remember that if it gets to a point where you cannot help these people financially anymore, they won't take your telephone calls. And you know what? I don't hate them for that, but that's the way it is. And you got to just remember that, and remember that you do something that they never will do. And you make a certain kind of art. Whatever stage of the process you're involved in, there's something that's very important to that process that you do that they don't. So just something to remember to kind of keep yourself straight.
So when you put in your invoice to the record company, is there a position on there with like being a shrink to the
That's
artist?
right, that's right. And I've also had clients tell me, I'm trying to remember who it was. I don't remember, but someone kind of tell me, I don't need a shrink, just press record. You know, it's like, cool, man, whatever. You know, but
No, but I mean,
all this
what's
stuff
the
is very
whole
important before
psychology?
you get to the studio. You know, this is like, there will be a time where you don't make records anymore, maybe. And there's a lot of time where you're not recording. And as I get older, there's times where there's other things that are important, well, almost as important to me as making music. So all that stuff, if you're not straight with that stuff, you know, all this other stuff's going to be gone sometimes. So it's important to just remember that, remember who you are, you know, when you approach this. You know, you mentioned another thing about preparation before coming into the studio.
I mean, what is it? Is it chicken and waffles? And how do you meet these people?
You know, I get calls. So, you know, I get calls from record companies, I get calls from management, I get calls from artists. Sometimes I meet people through my website. And if I'm mixing, I don't really record much stuff that I'm not recording or mixing, producing or mixing anymore. And that's nice. It's just that I got other things to do. If I'm mixing, generally, I need to hear the music. And I need to talk to the artist for just a minute to make sure that I can help them with what they want. Because the first thing I always say is, what do you want to do? You know, or what's the difference between the roughs of what I heard and what you want it to be? And you know what? If somebody says, you know, I really like the roughs. And if we talk for a while, and they really do, I said, listen, you know what? Who did the roughs for you? You know, you should really have them do
I
this.
see some question marks in here. What are the roughs?
Roughs are rough mixes, you know, just quick mixes at the end of sessions. Mm-hmm. And that's what I listen to before I decide whether it's a good idea for me to mix the record or not. And I've had, you know, you guys are familiar with a lot of my successes. I've had maybe more failures than everybody else. And by failures, I mean that, you know, you go in and you don't make everybody happy. And you got to learn how to get up, you know. It's not important that you don't fall, because everybody falls. I heard a football player talking about this the other day, and he said, but it's really important how you get up again, you know. Anyway, I've done records, I've been called to mix records where I make stupid money for doing this, that people in the middle of it have said, you know what, I want to go back and have the person who did the rough mixes do this. And you know what, that's fine. That's really cool. But I try to figure that out ahead of time because they can save a lot of money. Thank God, you know, I'm in a position, and things change overnight, but I'm not rich, but I would dress better. But I don't do things just for money. It's really cool, and if you can get your shit to a place where you can do stuff, it's a part of it, and I need to make a living. But the other stuff is all important. If I can help somebody, that's what I do. And that's one of the things. I listen to somebody's music and talk to them before I take on some mixing to make sure we're all going in the same direction.
But going down to the nitty-gritty, how are these rates constructed?
How many people here get money from other people for doing what they do? Even if it's a little. Good. Good. It should be, unless you don't want it, everybody should raise their hand, okay? And there's a thing to that. There are many different parts in my mind to being a professional, okay? And it's all the stuff I was talking about. And it's not so much that you're perfect, that you know everything. It's that you're trying all the time to know more and trying all the time to be better, both on a technical level and on a personal level and on a human level. One other aspect to me, of professional, if somebody says define that word, is you get paid, you know? And a lot of rates many times are constructed by what is going on in the marketplace. And a great example of that is what's happened with recording studios. How many people here live in a major city? Okay, then, and you all know what goes on with the big studios. And you'll see that
So what goes on?
with rates, the big studios, two things are happening. They're dropping like flies, they're going out of business, and the rates are dropping. And they're not going to go away. And the record business, as we know it, is not going to go away. It will change. And rates always go through these. I've been doing this since the 70s. And rates have gone like this. They're always going up, but it's kind of like this. They make a sidetrack. And generally, your rates at whatever job you are doing are going to be determined by the marketplace. So you have to look around. And a lot of times, you know, what you need to say to people is, say you're a freelance engineer. Okay, somebody calls you and you say, well, I'm $40 an hour, I'm $50 an hour, but you have to tell me if that works for your record. And pretty quickly you'll figure out whether they're just busting your balls because that's the way they are, or they really don't have the money, and then you got to make the decision whether you'll do it or not for that. And that decision is many times a combination. Anybody in here a guitar player? There was a guy who used to have a column in Guitar Player magazine named Tommy Tedesco. He was a fat old guy from LA, but a session player, played on all the Beach Boys records, a lot of Motown stuff. You never heard his name. But he used to write a column about sessions. And he said there's 3 reasons to take a gig, and he was right about this. Great music, you'll learn something you don't know, or money. So all those things kind of have to enter into how you adjust your rates. But I think all you will agree, anybody who gets money for what they do, a lot of times the benchmark or the middle level for your rates are determined by the marketplace. You know, and one of the reasons why I stopped tracking sessions, just recording, I said, I'm just mixing or producing now, is because I kind of looked at the economics, and no matter how much money I could ask for as a recordist or as a recording engineer, I looked at what people were getting for mixing, and, you know, was like, all right. And that's another thing, just, you know, about how you structure your rates. There's nothing, you know, a lot of us, it works 2 ways. You can either think that you deserve everything, but a lot of us, you know, if you have an artistic sensibility at all, most artists think they suck. You know, and if you're a little bit of an artist in your heart, you probably think that you're never good enough and you're always trying to get better, and everybody wants acceptance. That's what I was talking about, you know, I don't care if it's Barbra Streisand. She will love it if you say, you know, I really love what you do. And she's made, you know, a lot of money, man, got a lot of props. But it's important that you look around and you say, well, you know what? Other people are doing this. Other people get paid for doing what I do. So there's no reason that you shouldn't. There's no reason that you shouldn't. Some of you may think I'm nuts for even going there, but a lot of you are going to understand what I'm saying. You know, and yeah, fin de l'histoire. Love that term.
But when you talk about all these things and, you know, about getting paid and stuff, in the documentations of you talking, you use a phrase a lot, they use me. But how do you get used without feeling abused, like a hooker somewhere on 5th Street? Or?
Yeah. That's a tough one. We're all, the answer to that is kind of like, how do you mic a kick drum? You know, there's a million different ways. There's ways in which we all sort of come to that work for us, and there's ways in which maybe 19 out of 20 people do it, but there's all different ways. But it's a balancing act, you know, and it's no different for me than it is, well, it is probably, but I have management that deals with my finances or deals with making my deals and stuff. But it's a balancing act about how to A, set your rates, B, get your rates, and C, get paid. You know, And that's something that just comes from a couple different places. Comes from who you are and how you approach what you do, and also comes from just feeling out the situation, and not feeling it out to see how much you can get for how little work, but feeling out how you can feel like you're treating the people fairly and giving as much as you possibly can, and not going home at the end of the night or in the morning and feeling like shit because you feel like you got taken advantage of. And that's, you know, and it's interesting because, you know, I'm not saying anything you guys don't know or haven't felt, but it's really about that, and you have to put as much finesse into that, unfortunately, as you do at getting better at miking a kick drum. You know, the ways you get paid are interesting too, and I find that the more clear you are up front, this is something that's more concrete, the more clear you are up front with people, the better it is. And that, you know,
Is it you or the management which is more clear?
now for me it's the management, but we don't all have that luxury.
At which
Or that
stage-
disease, whichever way you want to look at it. You know, as I get older, there's certain things that I, only from experience and not from lack of fear, have I become more direct at. You know, we're all human beings, and you know, there's always a fear when you know, at a certain point, like, you know, when you sit down and talk to somebody about what they're doing, there's always a point at which you have to stop talking about what they're doing, and you go, well, cool, that sounds great. So listen, this is the deal about me. I'm $30 an hour, and I need to get paid in this fashion, and how do you do your billing, and what is your billing cycle? You know, if you're dealing with a, you know, if you're talking to an artist, for example, they'll say, well, maybe they'll say the record company pays for the stuff. And then you have to say, who does your A&R there? Or then you call the A&R person, you introduce yourself, and you say, who does your A&R? And first of all, you say to the A&R person, just like everybody else in the record, is there anything that's important to you that I should know? Gives them a great deal of confidence. They don't fuck with you. If they say, well, you know, they're always smoking too much weed and they're always late to the studio. So you say, well, yeah, I can't do much about that, but, you know, I'll try to keep things moving. Which is, if any of you just engineer for a living, you know that keeping the forward motion of the session going is a giant issue.
Any top 5 tips for that?
For keeping the forward motion, let's come back to that because I'm not done. So if you're dealing with a label, you talk to the A&R person, and then you say, who does your A&R administration? Because a lot of times at big or medium labels, there's one person who just gets the bills and writes the check. The most important person you can be friends with. You know, because they'll...
What kind of notion of friendship is that?
Yeah, right? Just, you know, make sure... And you call them. And you say, you introduce yourself, and you say, you know, I've already talked to the band and to A&R and to management, and we're going to start on this day. We're probably going to do this many hours a week. My rate is XYZ. What do you need from me? You know, what's your normal procedure for billing? And then you can say, you can get in the passive-aggressive stuff. You can say, because I want to make sure that I make this as easy as possible for you. Which really what that means is, I'm going to do it your way, but you better pay me, motherfucker. You know, that's really what it means. But
Is that a virtual translation for passive-aggressive?
Yeah, it is, you know, yeah, right. It is. But anyway, so communicate, you know, if it's a label. If it's the band that's paying you, a lot of times it's how you say something, you know. If you feel, could you not smoke in here? Thanks, I appreciate it. If you feel that there's going to be an issue about that, until you get a good working relationship up with people, it's fine. The first time you sit down, you know, get it out of the way. After you listen to the artist, say, well, great, let me just tell you how I work generally. I'm so many dollars, I'm $30 an hour, and I need to get paid in cash before or at the end of the session. You know, if you really feel bad about the people, you say before the session starts, but that's a little hard. But you know, you say, I need to get paid in cash when the session's done, and go on about your business. Then it's over. And then, you say, is that okay? Does that work for you? To make sure that they're cool with it and they really heard what you said.
And what would be the punitive or your...
Recourse if you don't get paid? Nothing. You don't do any more sessions for those people. And until you get to know them, it's really tough because, even if you have a purchase order from a label, and a purchase order is basically a document from the record label that says, okay, we know that you're going to do this much work for us and charge us this much, so we're expecting your invoices, and we will pay you. Now, you know what? That's especially, it used to be just with smaller labels where cash flow was a problem. Now with bigger labels, they suck. They try to hang on to their money as long as they can. And when I first got management, for the grace of God, I don't need more work. And I haven't for 20 years. But I said to my manager, I said, well, no offense, but why should we be doing this? And he said, well, among other things, I can make sure you get paid. And I said, I never have a problem getting paid because I do all the things that I told you guys about. And he said, listen, when they feel like as long as they feel like they may need you for something in the future, you'll get paid. But when they feel like they might not need you anymore, and this sucks, but it's a fact of life, and you don't have a lot of recourse except being as persuasive as you possibly can. And as you know, saying, fuck you, you're an asshole, I'm coming over to kick your ass, it doesn't really work for that long. Sort of your powers of communication, as in everything I've been talking about, your skills of communication are easily as important as how you mic a kick drum. And again, those of you who have experience know this, but it's important to keep thinking about this and just kind of work on that like you'd work on anything else.
Probably to take it a little bit away from the harshness and the realities of the business side of the aspect, could you probably, while taking your own history in account, give us a little rundown of how the roles of being an engineer or a producer have changed throughout the last couple of decades?
Sure. First of all, and I'll get back to this too, the best way you can be professional in whatever role you are, whether you're an engineer or producer, and a lot of times if you want to do it in the old school way and come up in a big studio or something, you'll be getting Chinese food for people first. Remember, whatever you do, try to do that thing and don't fuck around and try to be something else. You don't have to kiss people's butts all the time, but be professional. If you're a tea boy, make the tea and be real cool about that and communicate and say, is there anything else I can get for you? If you're sweeping the floors, make sure you sweep the floors real great and go to the engineer after you're done and say, I'm done, what else can I do? If you're an engineer, the issue of sort of getting into the production aspects of the record and stuff, very touchy area. Make sure that you focus on what you're supposed to be doing. Very important for me coming up because when I started engineering for outside clients, I was in my 30s already. And
what do you mean with outside clients?
For engineering for people other than me. Because I had already had a couple of viable careers. I had scored television, I was a working player, I produced a bunch of stuff, I'd done adverts, and I backed into engineering by mistake. Someone said, do you want to fill in for a couple of weeks? Someone's going away, and I said, yeah, I can do that. So I had a couple of degrees in music from the university, and my first records were hip-hop records. And I was dealing with people who came in who were half my age, who in a way didn't know anything in traditional ways, and it was very important that I didn't close down and say, who the fuck are you, no, I don't want to do it that way. A lot of engineers, as you guys probably know, when hip-hop started, kind of got pushed out of the business because There's a very subtle form of racism here, but I'll leave that aside, and I think you might understand how that is. But, you know, engineering at that point was a very skilled white male boys' locker room.
Ponytails is really essential as well.
Pardon?
Ponytails were really essential, right?
Yeah, ponytails. And you know, in the 70s and stuff, there were no engineering schools and stuff. It was really tough. And a lot of guys got pushed out of the business because they couldn't adapt. And they said, well, that's not the way I make records, or that's not the way people make records. So it's very important to kind of keep focused on your job, listen to your client, listen to your artist, and if you're engineering, back to that, make sure that you're focused on those things. If your artist is doing something that you feel may be not in the best interest down the road of the project, you have to tell them. And that's where your communication skills come in again. Suss out who is in charge, which sometimes is difficult, and that'll get into what a producer is, and pull them aside. Sometimes if you have a lot of people in the room and you need to get some communication going, it's best to say, excuse me, can I talk to you over here for a second? Because if there's a party going on, or if there's an issue about the hierarchy of who's in charge, you know, remove yourself from that. Ask somebody to come into the other room for a second. Plus, it lets them focus on you better. And say, listen, I know you guys want to do this, but it may give us problems down the road, and this is why. Okay? And explain the process as simply as you can, and say, you know, if you don't want to, you know, for example, SMPTE. In the old days when we worked on tape, people would come in on early hip-hop records, and this is really before there were samplers and before there was a lot of synchronization boxes that would lock to either time code, or if you work inside of a computer, it's not an issue because everything comes out of the computer. But back in the day, we'd have to stripe the tape with time code, with SMPTE, or EBU if you work over here, which, does everybody know what that is? Anybody not? Don't be embarrassed. I'll explain it real quickly. Okay, SMPTE and time code is a signal that has timing references embedded in it. So if you record something at one point from a computer and the beat goes like this, if you want to record something later on and have it right in the beat like that, you need it. It's very important. So back in the day, there were maybe drum machines like 808s, but there was no samplers, there were no computers, there were no sync boxes. But so a lot of artists would come in and they'd say, and many times it was a DJ with two turntables, and say, well, I want to do this beat. And you'd say, okay, what do you mean? You know, and they go, well, I have my turntables here. So, you know, a lot of times they would just flip back and forth between two records and put the beat down that way. Amazing when you think of it. Now, for a lot of people who have DJ skills, you might say, yeah, you know, so what? But that was, at the time, it was like, wow, it's an amazing thing that people can do. But anyway, with drum machines and stuff, it was very important that you kind of, a lot of people, and this was, you know, people who didn't have a lot of money, thus a lot of time in the studio. You know, they wanted to make a record in 2 hours. And you'd say, look, it'll just take me a minute. Let me stripe the tape with time code. And, you know, sometimes there'd be issues about that. So, you know, and then you got to say, and these are your human skills coming into play again, if you pull somebody aside, you go, don't worry about the time. This is important. Let me talk to you about this. You know, I'd have to say it's really important that we stripe time code, because if you want to sync up stuff later, you know, you won't be able to do it without this. And, you know, by and by, we all sort of figured out what we were doing at the same time. So anyway, back to like what you do as an engineer. You know, that's all those things about education and stuff. And if somebody keeps, say for example, keeps popping into the mic, you know, and you get a lot of P's and S's and T's onto the mic. Everybody know what that does when you get close to a mic and make wind? Okay, it can be ugly. Anyway, so, you know, you don't want your artist when they're on the mic to only be thinking, well, I got to stand up straight and I got to stay this far away from the mic. I used to do that, you know, and it's not, it doesn't, fortunately my people showed me love and they didn't get on me because of it, but it's not the, you know, you want the artist when they're on the microphone to be able to get as far into that special place as they can be. And like what I said before, if that entails them, you know, smoking a bag of weed, then that's what it is, you know. But anyway, at some point, you got to educate them. You say, well, listen, this is the way the microphones work. And, you know, by the way, this is another thing. Don't bother putting the windscreen right against the mic, the pop filter. If you put it right against the microphone, it's worthless. You need to get it a couple inches away at least. And in fact, the farther away, the better it's going to work. Same thing if the artist is right on top of the pop filter, it kind of doesn't work as well as if they're a couple inches away. So just a couple things about that. Anyway, but at some time, and not just before the artist goes out to do their stuff, because they, you know, they don't want this in the back of their mind, but sometime, you know, educate the artist onto how microphones and pop filters work. And that, and again, Common is a great example. An amazing artist, and a really amazing artist. And a lot of times, one of those people that, yeah, he writes poetry and he rhymes and he's an MC, but if you really get into what he does, he's got that X factor. Anybody out here ever seen Common live? Really astounding. He doesn't jump up and down, he doesn't have dancers, you know, and in this day and age, in the modern age, you know, you think, wow, it's hard to kind of get over, you know, in a world where people are expecting a spectacle. He's got this incredible magnetism and energy and intensity about what he does. That's, if you haven't seen him, try to do it, because he just, you know, he doesn't jump up and down, but he definitely, his intensity, it's amazing, because a lot of times you want to see someone jump up and down. Anyway, he moves a lot on the mic. Well, you know, you got to learn to work with it. For those of you who are into microphones, maybe you want to pick a slightly wider pickup pattern. You know, maybe don't go into Omni or anything because you'll get a lot of room noise, but maybe pick a wider cardioid pattern. But when they're not, and by the way, for those of you who are engineers, if you do that, make sure you baffle down the room a little bit more, because as you widen up the pattern, you're going to get a lot more ambience from the room. And if you want that, that's fine. But if you don't, make sure you put more gobos around so you get less of that. So anyway, your role as an engineer, you know, make sure you educate your clients and make sure you do that. Producer, it's changed a lot. And as I said before, hip-hop has really changed that, just like it's changed everything else.
Can you probably, to make it more visible, explain what a producer was when you were doing PBS stuff, and probably what that is?
In the 70s, a producer was either someone from the record label who had made a lot of records, and again, maybe knew a lot about music, maybe not. An independent who maybe knew a lot about music, maybe not. Someone with a lot of money who maybe knew a lot about music and maybe not. And in those days, their involvement in the record took all sorts of different forms. You know, a lot of times a producer, and this is not, every producer does not do this, but a good producer does all these things. A lot of times, a producer would book the studio, book outside musicians if that was the case, make sure all the people in the band showed up and didn't get too fucked up if that was the case, helped decide what songs were going to be on the record. And again, not all of these things, but sometimes one or many or all of them. Talk to the band or the musicians about how they were going to approach the material. Hired an arranger if they were using studio musicians. If the producer was an independent, dealt with the record company to keep them off of the artist's back, kind of weighed the balance on what the artist wants to do versus what the record company needs, which is still one of the most important things that a producer can do in that in a record label environment. And now, let me see if I missed.
So it was a lot of, like a janitor, a mediator, and
mother, father, drug dealer, you know, whatever. And a lot of, and again, a lot of producers were just one of those things. I know a lot of real famous people, and I'm not going to name names, who I really like, and they got a lot on the ball, but I realized that back in the 70s, a lot of famous records, it was because the artists were there, and this is actually true about my career as well. It's because about what the artist does that made the record special, and the producer was just a babysitter or a buffer between the artist and the record label. But anyway, sometimes the sonics or the way a record sounds are not very important to a record. But in many cases, a producer is responsible for the sonics, whether he turns a knob or knows what a fader does or not, is responsible for the material and the artist and, how deep the record goes. I mean, when it really, and I may be screwing myself out of a lot of money, and I've said this in mix sessions where I'm getting paid stupid money to be there every day and get stupid about the kick drum. But a great artist can make a great record on a mini disc. I don't know if you like what he does or not, but I'm using him as an example because he's very simple. James Taylor. Like sometimes I get a little, I was really into James Taylor when he was starting out, because I was in high school or whatever. And then I kind of lost touch with that stuff, and now I listen to James Taylor, and man, he is so pure. He's just, it's kind of like what I was saying about Common. He doesn't have to jump up and down to do what he does. He just gets to that place when he's on the microphone that it's amazing. And James Taylor could make a great record on an answering machine for a telephone. But, we live in the modern age, so the state of the media arts are such now that we sort of have all come to expect certain things from an entertainment or a media experience. And that's, we should get to that one later, because I think that's the one of the big reasons why record sales are so down. Downloading is a really big deal, and I'll get to that too, because it's kind of like voting, but that's another story. The state of the media arts are such now. When you listen to a record, you want a good performance, and you want somebody who's really connected in that wonderful, intangible way so much that even if you don't like what they're doing, you kind of go, wow, that's deep, even if you don't like the style. But also we expect a record to sound good. We expect a record to have a sense of humor. We expect a record to have some surprises. We were talking about production. But anyway, you can't, oh yeah, so it's not just one thing that makes a great record, but it all starts with having someone who has something unique to say and has a really compelling way of saying it.
But you said earlier on with the democratization of production means and stuff, that's something, I mean, no matter how cheap a certain piece of software or computer is or whatnot, I mean, there's no real way you can get to that, can you?
Get to what?
I mean, this originality, or however you're referring to it.
Well, no, that's why, in a way, what we do, as a recordist or as a technical person, what you do really doesn't make any difference. But on the other hand, it makes a great deal of difference. How you facilitate the artist is what makes the difference. How you help the artist or set the table or make the environment to make sure that the artist does, and again, my concept of production is the most of who they are, what they are. And it's really interesting. When it comes down to it, it's a really sad thing, but all of us who are facilitators, and whether you're an engineer, producer, programmer, studio owner, musician for hire, yes, we are artists also, but and it gets back into the role of different people in the studio. Remember what you do. And if that kind of intense, if the artist doesn't have that thing going on, you can help. But you know what? If I'm mixing a record, and even if it's from an artist who sometimes has that thing, if I mix a track that sort of isn't quite happening or quite compelling, then I'll do my best to make it sound really good, but it will always be a track that sounds really good that's kind of a piece of shit, you know, but that's the way it is. And, you know, if you are developing your own artistry or trying to find artists to work with, you know, look for that thing. I mean, that just because someone, I think Star Search, what's the new one where, American Idol, God. Our media arts, well, television, has gotten to such a really disgusting place. And, you know, we're going to look back at this, hopefully, in 8 or 9 years. And just like we did in fashion trends and stuff like that, we'll look back and think, whoa, I'm really glad that's over.
I'm really
but,
scared
you know,
of the revival of that already.
Close? Yeah. But, you know, I mean, basically what's going on right now is we've become so desensitized to universally accepted positive human values, and the world has gotten to be such an awful place that our voyeurism, or our sense of the same reason people slow down on the road to look at an accident, you know, people who program television have taken advantage of that. And this will pass, you know, and I don't hate them for it. It's just like people who market records, you know. And it's like playlists on radio. You know how a lot of radio syndicates in the States and everywhere else develop their playlists from computer models. And the computer models are developed by playing a bunch of people like 4 seconds of a song. And, you know, hit 5 buttons, 1 through 5. And the most 5s get played on the radio after 4 seconds. Now, radio stations stay in business by making money. And they do that by selling advertising. And the more people that listen to this radio station, the more money they can get for their advertising. Now, if I was a business person who bought a radio station and didn't know shit about radio, which is sort of how it works, but I was a business person, I can't hold it against these people. If someone came to me and said, look, I have this service that if you do things my way, you'll make more money. I'm thinking, wow, that's what I'm in business for. So TV people, I can't hold it against them. You know what the problem is? And my problem, stop me because I'll go on about this. My problem with the political situation in the United States is not George Bush. My problem with the political situation in the United States, and it's interesting that today's election day, my problem is the people who buy that shit. And my problem is people who know better. Everybody knows better. Everybody has a mother and a father somewhere. Everybody learns the difference between right and wrong. And people in the States now, and the interesting thing is, it's gotten to the point where you get some people who say, well, I know he lied to us. And I know, and this is from the person who we should all, it's like a crooked policeman, you know. That's kind of like the worst thing in the world. Somebody sells you a piece of fruit and charges you too much, that's one thing. Someone who has the public trust, you know what? This is the same thing I was talking about as being an engineer or a practitioner. Anyway, but it's the people who say, I know he lied to us, but it's cool because I feel more comfortable with him. That's what gets to me. Anyway, back to records. The thing, we have become accustomed to so much stuff coming at us from so many different places that besides that thing, that really special, indefinable thing I told you about, that someone does a unique thing in a very special way, in a compelling way, besides that, making a record, you got to have a lot of other stuff going on now. And it's just because of what we've become used to. That's why, so one of the main reasons, I think, digital downloading is wrong. Let me just tell you guys something. And there are a lot of new media and digital theorists who have some philosophically compelling arguments for why it's okay to take things digital for your own use, whether it's for entertainment or otherwise. Let me just say one thing. I know you won't believe that I'll just say one thing, but I will. If someone else made something that's very important to them, either with a lot of money or a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, or a lot of heart and soul, or any combination of those things, you have no right to take it without asking them. And someone, you know, there's no, and people will say, well, the record companies make too much money. Well, start your own, you know, or buy independent artists. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt. About the last thing you said, okay, we're in a situation where everybody's an artist up to a point. He has blood and sweat over something. That could be music, that could be film, that could be anything. All right. Isn't it all human, though? And I mean, we invented the means of actually sharing all that, downloading. And
we invented guns, too, man. It doesn't mean you should go out and packing a gun and shooting other people.
The same way you say that, the guns are used mainly, I mean, they still are around us. I mean, okay, what you said is totally correct.
You're right.
You understand, my point is like, you take that for granted and you move on. Maybe for me, the most...
I won't, you know what, and that's I understand what you're saying, and there is a truth to it, you know, but I have to draw the line somewhere, and it's the same way I draw the line with being violent towards somebody else. You know, I can walk up to somebody on the street and smack them, but I don't do it. And it's all around us, and other people do that, but I'm not going to do it. But, you know, that's a choice, and if you believe in your philosophy, it's there, and it's a part of life, so, you know, I guess that justifies doing it. Well, you know, that's the way you think. But I feel differently. And I think that the thing I was talking about why record sales are so far down, is due to a couple of things. The biggest issue, I think, is that, well, two big issues. One, that our media experience, when we either buy or get for free a media experience, we're used to like some amazing stuff, and all you have to do is go to a video arcade, a video game place, to see. When a kid puts money into a machine now, he sees something, he hears something, and many times you feel something. You know, like those things when you drive the car and you crash, it pushes the steering wheel. It's amazing. So in a way, a record, which is only a sonic experience, in a way, is just one-dimensional compared to that. At the same time, then it's incumbent upon us as practitioners, then you say, well, what makes a record special? And the special thing is about a record is it can take you somewhere that the literal experience cannot. And that's the whole thing, is that you have to make your thing compelling enough that people get sucked into this whole world. When I talk to clients about production, a lot of what I say is a record has to be like a little movie. Or it's on my website, it's funny, there's a Powerism, Power's Law of Production number 17. You know, you have to get sucked into an experience. When you listen to a Marvin Gaye record, you don't say, wow, that guy could sing really high. He had great chops. No, when you listen to what's going on, you get into the whole world inside of that record. And that's what we have to do as record makers. And that's the X factor. That's the intangible about why a record is cool, even in light of that there are other things that can come at you from a bunch of different directions. I also think that's why we all keep doing it, because we've all had that experience. But that's one issue why record sales are suffering that people overlook, I think. I also think that, as an example, and I don't have the answer to this either, but more 12-year-olds know who Tony Hawk is and are more into who Tony Hawk is than are into Robert Plant. Everybody know who Tony Hawk is? The big skateboard guy. And Robert Plant, if you don't know, was a singer for Led Zeppelin. So, culturally...
But you're talking, what, 15 to 20 years age difference there as well.
Yeah.
Well, Tony Hawk is not that young anymore.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that's reality, and we got to deal. And you know what? You may be right about what you said. That's reality. That's cultural reality. But I'll also, and here's another thing that I know is true, and I wish I had an answer. I wish I had answers for everything. I have a lot of questions. There's no great musical movement that's a big wave that's carrying the music business, the record business. Although hip-hop still, and R&B still is a very large segment of record sales, it doesn't have the wave effect that it did sort of from maybe 85 through 98 of carrying the rest of the enthusiasm for the record business along with it. Now, as evidenced by hip-hop, music is always ancillary to and not the driving force behind social movements. And if you really think about it, it's really true. Like hip-hop, there's all this stuff that came up around it, and a lot of people have made a lot of money. Clothes, a way to talk, like I said before, a way to walk, you know, and some not so positive things, you know, some ways of behavior that maybe aren't so cool. Hang on just a sec. But that followed hip-hop. The music was a part of that. And if you look at early rock and roll with Elvis and wearing leather jackets and the James Dean thing, you know, the outlaw, and you look at sort of the British invasion and wearing, you know, funny jackets with epaulets, and you know and you look at raves and stuff and cool pants that you can. I love it. You know, one of the things I love about hip hop and fashion is then you can go to your tailor when fashions change and you can hold up your shit and you say, make me 3 of these out of this, and it's cool, you know, because they can cut them down and make 3 pairs of pants out of 1. Anyway, it's always. The new musical movement, of which we have none, and if there's some around that I should listen to, let me know, is always ancillary. It always follows a social movement, and I haven't really seen any new social movement coming along that's going to make some big musical movement. But who knows? I'm sorry.
Had you heard that? Well, actually, I was just at a concert the other night, and on the stage, the artist said that post-September 11th, they made a blacklist of songs that they didn't want to have played on the radio. And the artist said, I don't know if this is true, I have yet to confirm it, but the artist said that Imagine by John Lennon is one of the songs. And he said, can you imagine that? You know, like, for that reason. Now, if that's the case in the United States post-September 11th, let's say yes or no, I don't know, I'm going to believe them.
Yes, it was then.
Well then, there you go. So if that's the case, then my question is in response to what you just said, how can we even get exposure to that next musical movement? How can we even get a view of this ancillary cultural thing?
Yeah.
If it's being prevented?
I think in a way they're 2 different issues. I think they're part of the same issue, but they're kind of 2 different issues. Post revolution, and I say the revolutions, you know, like the Beatles. I'll use that as a benchmark. That's when things started, and all of a sudden there was a way to think differently and act differently and dress differently. And sometimes you got your ass kicked for it, and sometimes we still do. But people and us, and thank God that the information resources, you know, through the internet to a great degree are still available to us. People will always find the stuff that they want to. It's the reason why people still smoke weed. You know, I'm not saying that it's cool to outlaw it because of that, but I'm just saying people will find it. The other thing is, this is me, and I think that in a way, if you have a cultural message or a cultural imperative with your music or your art, 2 things. Number 1, radicals are very important. People who do radical stuff are really important, but not because we say, oh, I'm going to do that because, you know, I believe in that. The radicals are important because they pull the middle over a little bit. Anybody who's on the end, all of a sudden the middle shifts a little bit. For the rest of us, I think that from an artistic point of view as well as a social point of view, the political direction and emphasis of one's music or art in general is a sort of very stealth thing. And I think that, number 1, just on a sort of my concept of production and stuff, preachy does not work. If you, you know, and that's why, you know, if you have someone getting up and saying, do stuff this way because this is the right way to live. No, that message is always in the really great artists, that message may be there, but it's there in a much more artistic way. And that's probably why some people are not good lyricists and some people are. People who are get their message through in a way that sometimes you got to listen to, you know, a lot, and then you say, wow, that's really interesting, you know. But that's an artistic thing. I also think that, and this is my feeling, the most important politic that you can have, and your effectiveness as a political person, starts right here and right here. And it deals with the way that you treat the person sitting next to you. But that's my politic. Now back to that. The United States is in a pretty ill political mode right now. The reason, one of the main, there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the, from an effectiveness point of view, and from a purely, what's the word? Anyway, from a point of view of effectiveness, the powers that be have become, it's very interesting. If you look at the last election, you know, when George Bush says to me, I'm against a woman's right to choose because most of my constituents, most of my people feel this way. He may be right. He may be right, okay? He may be right that 51 people feel that way and 49 people feel another way. That doesn't make it right, you know. And unfortunately, there's become this really... Now, number one, I feel that the political divisions in the states are very much like that now. It's really just like this. But there's become a whole new sense of self-righteousness on the part of on the right, saying, well, why shouldn't I be able to feel like this? Or why shouldn't I say, you know, my kids need to say a prayer in school every day? Why should you prevent me from saying that? That gets into a lot of issues that's not my thing to talk about right now. But the Constitution, if the Constitution is supposed to reflect some very broad-based, commonly accepted human rights, then that's why that thing exists. And I don't think any culture feels any different than those ideas. Did you have a question?
Yes, please. I heard you saying earlier that coming from America, you have so many questions, generally speaking. I'd like to comment on that and say that maybe you coming from the United States, or maybe the whole exposure of reality is in a very certain pattern. Maybe in a very certain pattern.
Right.
I mean, patronized, you know. Maybe what you mentioned the word radical as in something that is out of the norms and the forms, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you should be not looking for, but be ready to accept something that is out of your capacity, something out of the United States.
You're right.
Something out of your code of analyzing and interpreting music and the schemes that happen
You are
in the
right,
industry.
and those are questions I ask myself as a creative artist
as a
all the time.
radical, I mean, isn't actually downloading music and making a great collecting so many sounds with just clicks on a keyboard, isn't that radical? That is a way to move forward.
Playing clicks on a keyboard is one thing. Taking something
Sorry,
that belongs to someone else is not.
Yeah, but if you think about it, making a multi-layered and multi-faced industry out of one musical style, that's overanalyzing, and maybe overanalyzing can happen in many, many directions in nowadays society.
You think that's a positive thing by taking those things and making a...
I'm not analyzing the procedure of downloading somebody's track. I'm just seeing that as a behavior it happens more and more. So maybe the industry should come up with another way of exploiting art, or whatever art is, or music, and maybe you could get what you want, recognition.
Okay. Just because a kid runs by, if there's a guy selling fruit, and just because you could go by and take the fruit and stick it in your pocket and walk on, you're telling me that maybe the people who grow the fruit and the guy who sells the fruit should come up with a new way of getting the fruit out there.
No, but if it's a mass phenomenon in society, people stealing fruits, maybe you should do something with that.
I kind of disagree with you, and you know what? But there's great
you
points.
Take that
really,
for granted and
really important.
Maybe find fruits that are not. Yeah, or make them cheaper, or find new fruits.
Really important points.
Make them want to buy fruits.
Then I think that's a great point. I think that's really important. That's what I was talking about before, with there's nothing really compelling out there. I agree with you on that level.
What you're basically saying is, when we're sticking to the fruit example, that you want the fruit to smell good, because you You want some nice packaging. You want it to taste real. You don't want like some gene modified, whatever kind of stuff. But
Well, guys, let me say this before I forget.
I think someone have the feeling that we're losing the plot there somewhere, and I wanted to probably go back to a different kind of radicalism, which is part of the reason why we want you here, and probably listening to an example from low-end theory might be a good starting point for that other side of radicalism there.
It's ancient history for me, but let me just say one other thing. I'm sorry, man, because you're right. We're here to talk about music. The issue is capitalism. No, listen, man. The issue is capitalism. The issue is not art. And we could talk, let's talk about that somewhere else. But that is really the issue. And that's not my area of, you know, I'm a human being and I live my life. But that, you know, we can talk about that too later, okay?
Yeah, since you have it, we need to find out something. You're talking about extensively. Maybe just...
I'm very happy to find out about new modes of expression. I don't like to take things that belong to other people, you know. And maybe, you know, maybe I'm old school, man. And then you get into the thing, and this is something that was on your agenda, about sampling. It's like, well, yeah, I participate in records that do sampling all the time, but then should it be free? You know, or how? And then you get into the point where, well, no, Bob says that if something belongs to someone else, you can't take it without asking them, or if they say, I want $5 for this without paying for them. Well, then if you just take a snare drum. So who defines what it is? And, you know, that's something that's going on in the courts in the States right now, is exactly what defines a unique artistic work that defines whether there is ownership of that right now. I think it's an interesting concept.
I mean, the whole question of intellectual property is really one we have to deal with.
But it's like a blues song. You know, there's only like 4 or 5 notes in a blues scale, but there's a lot of people who put it together differently. And it's the same thing with language and phrases. And you know what? The dividing lines that we draw are all subjective. They are all subjective. And that's why societies exist, because societies and laws generally are groups of people that get together with somewhat common beliefs that have, whether we like it or not, rules for social order. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but that's sort of what we're at right now with sampling and what defines a sample. I know that I'm being nudged to get away from politics, so I'm going to try to do that, if that's okay. If you guys want to talk about this stuff later, that's cool. But you said you wanted to play something?
Oh, maybe. I guess there was something over there.
It's not to trivialize the issues of politics and downloading music, whatever, but I just think they're very circular arguments. You know, we could be here for the next 2 weeks, and I'd just love to get some information about your role in producing a lot of the native tongue stuff, especially Balloon Mind State, and what Dilla actually came to the studio with, and what you actually did. I know you spoke on I Am I Be. Well, I didn't realise that was you until Torsten mentioned it earlier, but just what finished product they actually came to the studio with, and what your role was in completing the product or whatever.
That's a very good and to-the-point question.
Just some definitive answers.
You know, as in what I was saying before about a mini disc, the reason that De La Soul and Tribe and some of my people are who they are is because they're great artists. And that takes a lot of different forms, and at different times it's different things. In the case of many hip-hop records, for example, and it goes from one end of the spectrum to the other. And one end of the spectrum is someone coming in with a record and a turntable, playing something and says, I want you to sample that and loop it up, and then I'll do some other stuff on top of that. And then you build the record that way in the studio. And perhaps I'm doing all the programming in that sense. But there's somebody coming in and say, this here, that there, this here, that there. All the way to people coming in with stuff that's already sequenced in samplers, and all I do is sit there and, as an engineer, split out the outputs, and in the old days, record it to separate tracks of tapes or Pro Tools, just so we can manipulate it a little bit more. And them sitting there and pressing play on their MPC or their computer, all the way down to people coming in with Pro Tools files, and I mixed the record. Balloon Mind State particularly, Dilla has always, the guys are really smart guys, and they've always been very aggressive on, very early on I got from them, they felt that if they understood and controlled the technology, it would be a lot better. And Prince Paul is out of that same place. So they were into, they got Little Macs very, very early on and started sequencing with certain software. And you know, they were smart too, because they didn't let the technology derail their creative nature, which happens, you know, I think most of us are probably technology geeks. And a lot of times we get so into how something works that you sort of forget about the purity or spontaneity of your creative vision. But to go back to
Is there a power law to prevent that as well?
No. Just think, you know, remember what role you're in at what time and keep it in your mind. Many times, this is interesting because I was thinking about talking about this last night. If you are an artist and an engineer at the same, and you know, it kind of, nobody's not all those things at some point or another, divide your tasks. It's very important for me when I'm producing or coming up with parts or playing that I totally forget about the other thing. I turn in, almost on purpose, when I'm recording myself playing guitar, I turn into a real piece of shit engineer. I turn knobs and press record, and then really try to forget totally about it. And the stuff of me tracking myself, if someone else gave it to me, you know, to mix, I'd say, God, this person's terrible. There's buzzes and hums. But it's very important for you guys as artists and technical people to separate your tasks. And that's, you know, just say, you know what, today I'm just writing, and I'm going to get something down as quickly as I can. And if the programming's not perfect, I don't care. I want to get the idea down. But back to Balloon Mind State. That was a very complicated record. A lot of that was. Paz is a really brilliant producer and track maker, and Pastanus. People don't sort of know that. You know, he did a lot of the tracks on that. I think Prince Paul did some of them, but Paz did a lot of them. He's a really brilliant track maker, and sort of people don't know that. Anyway, at that point, it was a little bit of both. Some of it was them coming in with records and me sampling and programming them. And at the time we used Macs, but I was really into Notator on the Atari, if any of you know that. That was a great platform that a lot of people still are like trying to keep their Ataris going because they just feel so good. The collage, the most interesting thing that I remember about the technical things about that record was the I Am I Be, the collage at the beginning of that with all the voices coming out, because we had 24-track tape machines. So there was a lot of stuff filled on the tape. And you know, it's interesting, one of the marks of great art is that it can either be something that's very simple, that's wonderful, or it's something that's very complex that the artist is so good that they make look really simple. Like when you watch Nureyev dance, you think, wow, I could do that, you know. But that record may sound simple, like a lot of hip-hop records or tribe records, but there's a lot of stuff going on. One of my jobs is to pay attention to detail, so that's why that happens. Anyway, so we didn't have enough tracks to record. There were like 60 or 80 voices in that collage. And, you know, the way I heard it was having this sort of space that you're in with voices with different degrees of clarity and close or far or recorded quality, just like this whole thing with all these like voices coming out of the darkness all over you. And the way we did it was, they only had S1000s at the time. That was all they were up to. You guys, these were different lines of Akai samplers. And the S1000 was at the time a very sophisticated piece, now very primitive. And there were only, I realized that what we needed to do was print this to 1 or 2 stereo pairs of tape that each one had like 30 voices that all came out from, you know, on one pass from the sampler. So I spent about a day and a half programming all the voices, getting them placed right in the stereo spectrum, and how far away or close they seemed, how much reverb they had, how hi-fi they were. Some of the best stuff on that they recorded on like mini discs over the telephone. So, you know, developing that collage, and that, this is a really, I'll try to keep this brief. How many of you know the S1000? Okay. There's a page, when you develop a key map in a sampler, quickly for those of you who don't know what that is, that basically says what key on the piano is going to play what sample, what sound. And on many of them, there's something called MIDI to key map, and you can press keys and have it go from one sample to the other and set up the MIDI map. It's a very easy way of doing things. On the S1000, there was no way to turn that off. So when you were in the key map page, if there was ever any MIDI coming into the S1000, it would change your whole key map. And I had worked for like much of a day on this thing, and it was, you know, 5-6 hours. And I was on that page, and by mistake I hit play on the sampler, which happened to have all the drum patterns in it too. So like my half day's work went, changed everything, and I had to go back. Just a thing, save often and early. You know, so that record was a combination of them coming in with things pretty much done, and then I think that an SP12 was involved, that they would come in with things they had sequenced. So it was a combination of both.
I was just wondering, was that a guitar sample, or did you have somebody come and play live on that MIP?
There was some stuff on that record that I replayed for them. I don't really remember what it was. That's another interesting thing that's an aside. For those of you who are instrumentalists, you spend all your life trying to play in the pocket with stuff, trying to be a better groove and feel player, to play with things, you know, to really integrate yourself into the music. When you're replacing samples, it's a really interesting phenomenon, because the reason that the stuff sounds really cool is because it has a slightly different time feel, because it was meant to fit into another piece of music. And the reason why it sounds cool is because it doesn't quite sit in the pocket. It's what I call the rub. And if you take out the rub, you lose a lot of funk and you lose a lot of interest. So for those of you who are instrumentalists, many times it's better to try to replace the thing with the original music and not with the new stuff, because it's, you know, just for that reason.
It's just, don't want to dwell too much on Balloon Mindstate because we've got a lot of stuff to talk about, but just about the I Be Blown track with Maceo. How did that take place? Did that all happen in the studio?
The one where he's playing on IMIB, it was a combination of him as a sample and him playing live, and then the other one was his band, which, what's it, the Patty Duke?
No, the I Be Blown with the instrumental track.
I think that was just IMIB as an instrumental. I'm not sure. That was IMIB without the, yeah. What happened was Maceo blew over. We kind of said, just blow, you know, because you can't legislate that stuff. And I think for the vocal version, we might have sampled and or used certain live parts as they sat. But the thing was so incredible that they said, well, let's also mix this and just have him playing through. And then there was also the Patty Duke, which was one of the most thrilling moments of my entire life. I've met and worked with a lot of stars and musicians, but having Maceo's band come in and play, that's where I got to know Larry Goldings, the organist, who is an amazing jazz musician and one of the funkiest people on the planet, and a great guy, and I developed a relationship with him. But also, I think his name is William Parker, Maceo's brother, who played on a lot of James Brown records. Pardon?
Melvin.
I'm sorry?
Melvin.
Melvin, right. Came in and played drums. And that was just, you know, I mean, I'm into jazz and I'm into really complex stuff. And he did what he did, and this whole world was in his grooves, you know. And he came back, he was an older guy, and he came up in a suit on the train from Washington, D.C. I think he was teaching grade school at the time. Very distinguished guy, very refined cat, you know, very polite and stuff, and then sat down at the Kid, and, you know, it was very interesting. Usually with a jazz drummer, when you listen to a jazz drummer, one of the things you listen for on a study level is their independence. You know, you don't just hear this whole beat. You sort of hear all these little different beats on different limbs and stuff. And especially on a funk track, you don't really think about that stuff. You just think about the groove. But he was just doing all this stuff that was like, you never lost the fact that it was a groove, but if you listen to that track, like each part of his drum thing could be a whole song in itself. It's really incredible. Wonderful.
Is it on? Yeah. I think, well, Q-Tip in the 90s had one of the most distinguishable snares in hip-hop or in hip-hop tracks and was credited with like one of the meanest snares. What role did you play in that or did you play a role in that, layering it or panning or anything like that, or was that just something he came to the studio with?
Different at different times. You know, Tip also, we think of it as an MC and an artist and sort of a personality. He is also one of the great programmers of all time. You know, his records tend to be so well integrated. Just like I was saying before, you listen to a Marvin Gaye record, you don't say, wow, great snare drum sound. It's this whole world. And the records that he's involved with tend to be so, and particularly the low-end theory, it's just this whole world. You don't listen, you say, you know, you get sucked in. But at different times it was different. And one of the interesting things about how hip-hop opened me up at a time in my life where I sort of thought I knew a lot of stuff already was we were all making this up as we went along. So in the early days, whether or not Tip would come in and say, we want that snare, and you know, I'd sample it off the record and stuff, or he'd come in with tracks that were already sequenced, there were a lot of techniques that in those days we used to beef stuff up. And I don't think we were the first, but I had never heard of a lot of stuff before. And for example, there were times where the snare didn't have enough real pop to the beginning of it. And you know, if you compress it, that's great. That's one way to do it. But it also changes the sort of envelope. And if you get enough pop that you want, usually you lose that kind of old, crunchy, fucked up hip-hop sound. You know, you get this sort of dance thing that's like splat rather than, you know. And so we would take, like, I would take the attack from a cowbell a lot and put that up underneath the beginning of the snare. But it takes, as you guys, you know, it's a fairly common thing, especially for dance and club music now. But at the time, putting it into a sequencer and sliding it against the snare so the timing was right, and two things. Number one, so you didn't hear it, so it was right at the attack, but you definitely felt it. And there's a volume thing. It's got to be just right. The other thing is when you combine two sounds like that, you know, as you change the phase relationship between the two, the aggregate sound changes. By the way, this is another thing, just a little aside for those engineers. If you're ever mixing a track that has a couple of kick drums that are playing the same thing, try flipping the phase on one of them early on just to kind of see what it does, because it might be a better place to work from, especially if you're doing a live track and there's an inside kick drum mic and an outside one. Put them up, play with the levels between the two, because the sound will change radically, but also try flipping the phase on one. Even if it's out of phase, it doesn't matter. You'll notice that it may be a better point of departure for your sound. So anyway, some of the techniques we used were stuff like that to try to get the stuff to pop more. That was always an issue, because Tip was always all over me, and it, you know, I love him, but a lot of times he was behind me, you know, make the snare louder, no, make the kick louder, no, make it pop more, and it was, I worship music. So it's very hard for me to defile music in a way that I think may be harmful to it. But, you know, again, that's a lesson as an engineer or as a mixer. You're making your artist's record. You're not making your record. So try as hard as you can to go there. I'm trying to think of some other things. We were always mixing in other sounds with the stuff to make it smack a little bit more.
Oh, quick question. What are the... you did Engineer Award Tour, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because there the snare, the kick, the beat is so heavy and it's so clear. And I was wondering if that was one of the tracks that Tip gave you a hard time on.
All of them. I just have this image of him behind me. Turn the snare up, turn up the kick. No, more snare, more kick. Now, I got to say that I do stuff now when I'm left to my own devices where the drums are always much too loud. But that's one of the ways in which hip-hop has changed me. I hear stuff that way. So almost every song we've ever done and I've ever mixed was like that. And that's funny because that record also, that was from the one with the faces all over the front. Pardon?
Midnight Marauders.
Midnight Marauders. As you can hear, the thesis behind that record, and Tip never told me this, but as time went on, I kind of said, you know what, it's interesting. Whereas on Low End Theory, which we were all learning at the same time, and we just happened to track most of it on a Neve board. And they happened, I was really learning at the time, and I was very unschooled in the get it down quick while the creativity is flowing aspect of engineering, which is tremendously important to me now. So at the time, I was just like, wow, let me work on this. And they were like, yeah, man, sure. So, but the thesis that I kind of discovered later on was that Midnight Marauders was meant to be sort of a grittier sounding record, a lot dirtier record. So it's interesting you say it was clear. I feel like I fucked up because it was supposed to be nastier sounding.
I mean, I loved it. It was great.
Yeah, yeah. Is a star. And that was sort of the first night where I ever saw him bust out into that. And we all couldn't believe it, you know, when he dropped his rhyme, you know, the oh my God part. And there's one thing that never goes out of my mind. I have a lot of Yamaha gear, and I'm not real good with lyrics because I've played all my life. I can hear a song and play it right away and stuff. But with lyrics, I can hear them 1,000 times. But this one I remember, part of his rhyme, he said, aha me, Yamaha, or Yamaha, aha me, which basically is the thing backwards. But anyway, and he got into the oh my God thing, and I don't remember a lot of other specifics, but I do remember that once Buster laid his rhyme, everybody went back and redid theirs. You know, and there was also some freestyling going on in the back room. And, oh God, Tip was doing it, Trugoy, Dave was back there, who's really totally slept on as an MC. If you really want to, I mean, you might know it, but total, flows like water, really great. And then there was this guy, you remember MC Watchout? There's a blind guy that one of the guys in Dilla was, or somebody was promoting. There was this like amazing freestyle session going on in one of the back rooms, which I wish I had a microphone for, but I didn't. But, you know, I mean, the electricity of that evening, you can really hear in the track. It was really great.
Well, let's put it on for a second. Maybe you remember something else about it.
I won't. I'm discreet.
Here we go, yo.
Okay, let's do it slightly different for everything concerning that track and Tribe in general. You got like 90 seconds now to throw everything in, and you will try to answer everything around that complex in one go.
No, let me just say a couple things before I forget them. Sorry. Right after this. No, there's a couple of, from an engineering standpoint, there's a couple of really important things about that I thought about. Number one, in hip-hop especially, but in music in general, a giant issue is the size and loudness of the vocal against the track. Because if you make the vocal too loud, the track will sound small. If you make the vocal, if you can't hear them, it doesn't help. Another thing is Tip sounds really soft in that track when he comes on. And I always have this problem mixing Q-Tip with an aggressive track because he doesn't scream. Now he does a little bit more, but because he always sort of spoke, if you turn the voice up really loud, it sounds way out of perspective. It's like somebody whispering being much louder than this track, and it's not that way. So that was always a really, really tough issue for me. And the second one is that I remember being aghast and freaking out that there was no hook until the end. Tip said, it's okay, you know.
Okay, is that a 90 seconds throw it all in kind of session now? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. There you go.
Is this 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2? 2, 2, is it?
I guess
2, 2, 2. Yeah. Were the mutes on the scenario done before or after the vocals are recorded?
I'm sorry?
The mutes.
No, they were done after. And also another thing that Q-Tip is one of the all-time greats. He always does drops where you don't expect it, but they're not just weird, they're like really cool. That's something where my education has totally been from him.
Concerning drum loops, because I'm assuming you didn't deconstruct the loop by chopping it up. You probably used it whole, unless...
I don't remember, to tell you the
Okay.
truth.
But a lot of them, like Fly Me Away by the Suns, which they used on a war tour, there's no hiss, and that record sounds like complete dog shit. So, I mean, how did those how did you get the hiss out of that, or like Electric Relaxation, which uses the Brethren?
Right. I got crazy. At the time, now there's all these amazing, do I have 90 seconds too? Now there's all these amazing digital things that take noise out. I hear Sound Soap is really cool. I haven't used it yet. At the time, we didn't have any of that, so a couple things. Number one, I had sort of pirated this thing called the Berwyn Noise Eliminator. For those DJs probably know, it's a really old piece that was very expensive in its day that helped take clicks and pops out of records, and I used to sort of do stuff through that. The other thing is I really worked EQ-wise to try, and unfortunately the hiss, say it's at 5K, is usually the place where all the real pop and brightness of the snare are. I went crazy on all that stuff trying to make it quieter. Yeah, oh yeah. I have the, I've used that. I'm getting the Sony one. I love that stuff.
I think one of the great things about that track is the group vocals on the doubles. I was just wondering how you mic those. Do you do them separately, or do you do them two mics and get everyone around them?
I won't say never, but if you're having a crowd like that, get them sounding, and the same thing with the horn section, but there's definitely a lot of exceptions to that. Get them sounding right in the space, and then try to capture it. So I think I probably just used two mics. I may have done figure eight because it was a tiny, tiny room. And it's really weird because usually a bunch of people yelling in a very small room sounds awful. That sounded pretty cool. And then all I remember was a tiny room. I probably used figure eight and put them on both sides and then kept going back in and saying, no, move in more, move, you know. But, yeah. That's the thing, you know, about educating your clients. If performers learn about pickup patterns, it's great. You know, that's if you tell people like about pickup patterns on a microphone and what the sonic ramifications of not being where you should be are, they're real cool, man. They get it real fast.
And Fife was telling me that there were several versions of Scenario, one that included Chris Lighty and the Dilla guys were on that. Was it planned that they were going to release this particular one, or they went for the best one? Or?
I don't remember, to tell you the truth. Yeah. I don't remember.
Okay.
I think Chris made me turn out the lights when he rhymed or something. I don't remember.
Was there ever any conceptual sort of thinking behind Low End Theory as such? Because, I mean, obviously you get a lot of brainy people with classes, and especially in certain countries in Europe, and they'd be fantasizing a lot about different use of jazz stuff and the whole, I mean, there's theory in it. Oh, it must be good, because,
yeah.
So,
you'd have to ask Tip about that. You know, he sort of, at the time, he was really young. I think he was 19 or 20. He's an amazing conceptualist, and I have a feeling that there was a lot of forethought there. But then again, you never know. Like, he also is a great producer in that he's able to seize moments. And I don't even know about the name. Maybe he thought of the name while we were making it. Or I think that's sort of was his thesis. You know, it's like, okay, let's have a record that booms more than anything. You know, and my thing was, yeah, but it's got to be clear too. So I really think that a lot of it he definitely had an idea. The idea of the jazz things and the integration of it, I think that that's just both his brilliance as a programmer. I think he did almost all of the tracks on there. Skeff did one, right? And Ali actually did one or two also, who was brilliant as well. But the whole jazz thing and the way it integrated, I think, it was just the right person and the right time. The right person with the right inclinations and the time. And
did your education as a jazz guitarist play into that as well?
Well, I got stupid with timing of things. If people would come in with beats on an SP12, which Tip is a master of this now, and I think a lot of that has to do with the large professor, who is also an absolute master and should not be forgotten. I would record, sometimes I wasn't happy with the feel of the stuff. So, you know, that's sort of part of my responsibility. So I would say, look, let me put this into the computer and fuck with it and leave me alone for an hour. So, you know, I would play the MIDI stuff into the computer, trigger the SP12, but then I had track offsets available. So, you know, I'd move stuff around, and, you know, the guys were cool enough that they let me do that. And then, you know, I'd say, cool, let's do it, or no, I meant it to be fucked up, you know, so that was a lot of that.
Okay, let me, maybe.
Yeah, I know JD is a producer that I really respect, and I know that I think you engineered something with Common that JD produced. I was wondering that whole issue with heavy beats, because his beats be very boom bap and really loud. By that time, were you like more used to, you know, doing that type of thing since you did Tribe stuff? You pretty much understood that whole concept of
I love it. He's holding the mic like an MC.
Yeah,
Check
I am an MC too, so.
Two things. Number one, with guys like Common, sometimes it's the same thing with Tip. I never feel like I get it right, and I really feel like some of his vocals are too soft in some of the stuff. That said, I mixed a record that JD produced most of for him, and some stuff for actually Tribe as well. JD is a pretty brilliant guy. You know, his stuff is really simple, but one of his brilliant things is sort of the kick he chooses, where he tunes it, and where the bass is in relation to that. And people who mix bottom-heavy music, you know that that's 90% of the battle. So JD's stuff, in a weird way, is easier to deal with as a mixer than it might sound, because he apportions where he tunes. And that's another thing, and most of you know this. If you're dealing with samples or just drum sounds on their own, where you tune them is absolutely key to both the feel but the sonics of the track as well. And where you tune your kick drum versus where the vocals are going to sit and where the bass line is something that you really, if you don't deal with it, you should.
Where do you tune them? Within the actual gear you're using, or?
Yeah, in the sampler. And you know what? I usually follow the groove first. Wherever the thing kind of feels the best is where I'll sit, not saying, oh, good, it'll stay out of the way of the vocals. No, you know, I'm like, the groove has got to be solid and feel great. There's another thing. Sometimes you'll do that and you'll say, wow, I really like the bottom of the thing when it's tuned way down, but I like the pop when it's tuned way up. So, you know what? You sequence it. You have two separate key maps and you put them both together. You usually have to advance the low one because the attack is at the wrong time. And sometimes the phase issues. But if you play two things at the same time, for those of you who don't know, two of the same things at the same time, you get phasing, which isn't always the best, isn't always what you want. But yeah, you got to kind of pay attention to that. But that's also a good thing to do. Or bring in a deeper sound to put in behind it. And you know, you don't want to hear these things as separate sounds. That's the other key, and that was a big thing in the making of the Tribe records. A lot of times with the early records, we'd put stuff down and I'd say, you know, the bass just doesn't sound deep enough. Do you mind if I double it? So the modern synthesizers are great, and virtual synths are great. The one truly wonderful thing that a Juno 106 is great for, and I still love it even though I hate big pieces of hardware, is it has this kind of subby bass thing that you can sneak in behind other basses and you don't hear it as a distinct octave down, you just kind of feel this thing. So we did a lot of that too.
Let me introduce a different argument and probably a different way of working here.
And the recall notes, you know, which allow you to set the studio back where it was. Now that it's Pro Tools sessions, and a lot of guys do most of their mixing in Pro Tools, some people, you know, wrote in saying, how do you feel about this? They're taking your secrets. You know, they might, they might use them. And I usually don't participate in discussion groups. I talk enough elsewhere, so I don't have to talk online. And so I read it for a while, and I also try to be linguistically as exact as I can when I say certain things. I don't curse when I write like I do here and stuff. And I don't say "and stuff" all the time. So I read it for a while, and I was trying to think of something that was really correct to say in rebuttal, because a lot of people were saying, well, they can take my vocal sound. And then another guy said, well, what if they just take the settings I used for all the tracks and use them to mix all their other tracks? So I wrote in and I went through this long, very polite thing about how mixing is, in the hands of someone who has done it for a while, a combination of 1,000 tiny details and judgments that are not any one specific thing. And even if you focus on one thing, like the bottom on the bass, it's not just that. It's how the person hears and the decisions they make, which, go into the first time they sang "Happy Birthday" to when they went to college to study engineering. It's all these different things. So I was very careful about the way I worded that, and I said, I don't think you can put this in a bottle. And then I said, I also think that every singer is different, every kick drum is different, so there's no magic EQ. And then I said, and to sum it all up, you got to be kidding. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. So that's my question, my response to that. I think
and if we reworded that in a way that are there relatively simple things to watch out for or to start learning when you want to, get your sound better? Or is this something more hands-on and individual for later on in that?
I think we all do this, but if I had to say one thing, it's, and we all do this, think about the sounds up and down. In terms of their frequency content, for those of you who might not know how much bass, how much treble they have, stuff like that. Think about where everything fits and learn to, I can't help it. That's why it's hard for me to listen to music. Actually, my iPod has helped me, because if the fidelity is on MP3s is so relatively low that what the thing sounds like is not the issue. It's made me start listening to the music again. But, just think about where things are placed like that. But it's very, other than that, it's very, very difficult. Learn as much as you can, read as much as you can, listen to what other people say as much as you can, and then if you really feel strongly about something, really try to do it your way. Because ultimately you're going to come to your own way. And you'll make a lot of mistakes and you'll feel like shit about it. But that's the way it works. You got to be able, getting up and how you get up is much more important than you don't fall at all, because no one never falls, okay? So, learn as much as you can, but also just follow your own muse. One other thing is just spare no expensive energy in knowing you really did everything you could, say, for example, if you're mixing, to make those people's records sound as good as you can. One other thing on a much more practical level, because I wrote down a couple of things before, get some studio monitors that, and everyone knows this, but get some studio monitors that you are comfortable with. I say that you're comfortable with more than...
Hang on, because it's a really complex issue and we're losing your voice.
Oh, okay.
We'll put something in here for a second.
I think actually I was off mic. I didn't take my own medicine. Hang on.
So
one of the most absolutely singular musicians that you know. I can't think of anyone else who does things that differently, and it's that dope. I really, it's just amazing. When we did that record, I didn't get Pro Tools till it was 24-bit, because if you've been with Pro Tools, you know it sounded like shit. And I used to have, can you all hear me? Everything cool with the mic? I used to have, in the early days, it was sort of the Wild West in terms of digital recording. I had something called a Roland DM80, and it was an 8-track digital recorder that weighed about 80 pounds, cost $15,000, and has hit the garbage truck years ago. It sucks, but that's the way that gear is. But it was the best sounding thing at the time. And this was really primitive, but it allowed you to import tempo maps. So Dee had programmed this stuff on an EPS 16. But I just didn't feel like there was enough control. And D, he said, fuck that, you know, take the stereo out, that's the record. And I was like, come on, you know, let's make this great. And so we took the stuff into my computer and messed with it a lot. And then with the DM80, I flew his background vocals from one chorus to another, because that was like a lot of vocal tracks.
You just said flew, right?
Pardon?
You said you flew his vocals?
Yeah, I flew.
Meaning?
By fly, I mean when you digitally take something from one spot and move it to another so it exists in two different spots. So when he sings exactly the same thing the first time as the second time, then you know you don't have to sing it again. So even though I had a tempo map, D'Angelo has made Behind the Beat into a whole nother universe. Cruisin' is a great example of that. Cruisin' sounds like he fucked up and sang to the wrong track. It's so behind. And I have been a musician most of my life and a funk musician for a lot of it. And my whole sort of time concept is all about behind. In fact, I'll tell you the story behind that guitar solo sometime. But anyway, when I flew his vocals, took them from the first chorus and put them in the second and third and stuff, even when I did it by the tempo map, so I knew it was like right on, for like a half day I was sitting there scratching my head, kind of moving it a little forward and moving it a little back, because I couldn't believe that it was like sounded as far behind as it does. And yeah, he's really amazing. I mean, he sort of he legitimized a whole new time concept like that, which up until that point had been kind of a hip-hop thing, you know, where people rhymed. And it's very, there's another thing. Like when the second wave of hip-hop started really being established, from like low end, like after the first Sonic record and when Dilla came in and tried, when Tip and some other people started kind of rhyming way behind the beat, there were times where Tip would do something and he'd come in the room and I'd say, are you sure, man? I said, it's really good, but are you sure? And then finally I got used to it too. But anyway, his time feel is phenomenal, really just absolutely brilliant and tortured musician.
Okay, we let that sink in for about 30 seconds. But what do you mean by it?
Everybody I know who I would consider a real artist, which basically means they say something very unique in a very different way, and it's very compelling, they're all nuts. And I love that some of my best friends, but they're all obsessive in one way or another, like we all are. That's all. That's what I mean. And
So
brilliant, I don't have to explain brilliant, because no one else, it's very, very difficult to do something very unlike what anybody else has ever done. Because you can do something different, but it's, you know, most of the time it doesn't groove. You know, you can just do something different for doing it different. But like Joni Mitchell, you know, she just has a radically different concept of how to put music together than most other people. And so does Dee, definitely.
And she never lies too.
Yeah, right.
Question. Mixing 101. Just a very
There's your one already.
Huh?
There's your one for your 101.
Oh, yeah.
Two.
It's weird. It's, you know, I thought it was like some hour. It's 6:15 and all the bells are ringing. Maybe that means Carrie won. I don't know. Not yet.
Check, 1, 2. Is it on? I can't tell. Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. Mixing 101. Very simple question. Might sound stupid, but I want to talk about buses.
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you have in terms of utilizing buses that people might not ever even mess with on their, you know, digital mixing board? And what are their function? Because I mean, I know what their function is in terms of a purely digital sense, but in an audio sense, what is the function of a bus?
Okay. For most of you know this, but a bus, and I'm doing this so I can illustrate something. A bus is like a master audio highway that you can send one signal, one sound, to one or many other different places. Now, normally you do that at the patch bay, but a bus lets you press a button and do that. And very simply, that's what a bus is. It also lets you combine things together. So it does both those things, and that's like as clear as I can be. If you have one audio signal and you want to send it to a bunch of different places, you put it into these different buses. You press the button and it splits it out and sends it to different places. The reason you don't use a Y chord for that is, number one, you need a Y chord that was a W chord or a lot of different things, and you lose some of the signal when you do that. The only reason that I avoid buses when I can is this. With most mixers and in most situations, to get something to either Pro Tools or tape, you have a choice of either using a bus, or pressing the bus button, press bus 19, the signal goes to track 19 on the tape, or taking a direct patch, which means you take the mic preamp and plug it straight into the tape machine. The only real issues I have with buses, it's an extra point in the signal chain where you go through another amplifier. So that's the only reason I try. And in fact, way in the old days, I was much more crazy about this than I am then. But you know what? If you can plug something directly into it without going through another amplifier stage, you know, get up. You know what it is? Get up off your ass and walk over to the patch bay. Because I know a lot of guys, for example, who used to track stuff that if the patch bay was over at the end of the console, they were too lazy to get up, and what they would do as they did different vocal takes, you know, say you do a bunch of different vocal passes to track 9, track 10, track 11, so you can listen to the best one or comp them together. They'd press in all the buttons, use one fader, and just put the record tracks into record. Get up, pick up the patch bay, or the patch cable and plug it into the other one. Generally, the less stuff you put in between you and the record medium, the better it's going to be. That said, another way in which hip-hop has affected all of us is hi-fi is not always what you want. So, you know, it goes both ways.
I tend to use the buses for tracking, of course. But,
there we go.
But I found it's a great way to allow you to send different channels to a single stereo compressor. So I like to compress like my kick and snare and hi-hats together again after they maybe have been compressed separately to glue them all together. Is that a common thing to do?
Yeah, very, very common. And I've gotten to do it much more. If I had a board, it would be easier to explain, just for as briefly as I can.
I'm going to do that in a couple of minutes anyway, I guess.
For those of you who don't understand, what he's talking about is, say you have a mixer and you have different faders, and this is the kick drum, and you turn it up to where you want it, and this is the snare drum, and this is the hi-hat. In addition to listening to the stuff like that, you also send it through a bus to a different place, put an effect on it, and in this case compression, and mix it back in on another fader with the original. That's about as simple as I can make it. It's a pretty accepted rock way of mixing to do bus compression. And a lot of times, for example, you'll take all the drums, send them to a stereo bus. Don't listen to them through the main mix. Take all the drums, send them out, sort of a whole separate mix of their own, but you're not hearing them through the main mix. Put them through a stereo compressor, which generally makes them pop a little more, and then bring them back into the full mix like that. Same thing with EQ. You may, if you don't have enough gear, but you got a bunch of buses, and by the way, this only works on an analog board, and I'll explain that in a minute. Sometimes I have, for example, if I'm mixing a record and I put EQ across the whole mix, I'll make everything sound as good as I can, then take an extra equalizer, and before I put the vocals in, I'll do a little more EQ just to make it really right there. But then when I put the vocals in, I realize that all the high frequency that I added to the drums to make it snap makes the vocals sound really essy and too bright. Well, in that case, I'll take all the instruments out of the main mix, send it to an auxiliary 2-track bus, put the EQ on that, bring it back into the main mix, but leave the vocals out of it, okay? So I do a lot of that now. Rock guys like do a lot of it. A lot of times, if you don't have a lot of gear, you have an analog board, this is a good thing to do. Set up bus 4 as your send to a compressor. Take the output of the compressor, bring it up on another fader. Do not send it back to bus 4. You know, again, bus 4 into the compressor, but bring the output of the compressor up over here. Then anytime you have an element that you want a little more smack to, particularly drums, send a little bit of that drum to the compressor. It will go, you'll have the dry drum over here and you'll be hearing it, but then you'll have the smacky, compressed sound of the drum coming back, and you can, you know, do as much or as little of that as you want. It's a little tricky with levels, you know, and that's the idea, that one of the reasons, for those of you who do this a lot, one of the reasons you got to watch bus compression is, for example, say you got all your drums through a compressor and you're not hearing them dry, you're only hearing them compressed. Say the snare drum is too loud. So you turn down the send from the snare drum, but all of a sudden it changes the way the compressor is reacting to everything else. So it's a little bit dodgy. I'm sorry.
More on the drum stuff. Back to that tune with Spanking on it, what do they do? How much did you sort of beef up Questlove's drums?
To tell you the truth, I don't.
You can't remember, or was it?
I don't remember specifics. I really, a lot of times what I'll do with live drums to make them really pop but not make them sound too fucked up is just what we just said. I'll leave the dry drum there with no compression, EQ that the way I want, and then take another tap off that drum sound, send it through another fader so I can mix it back in with the original, but compress the daylights out of it. And so it's like really pop, pop, rather than boom, boom. And, you know, mix a little bit of that back in with the original. That's a real, if you have enough inputs on your board, it's really great because you don't change the envelope, you don't change the attack characteristics of the main one. You can't do that, for those of you who don't know, you cannot do that digitally. It's very difficult. The reason you can't do that digitally is because when you send something out to something else digital and bring it back through another fader, it delays it. It makes it late. And you get phasing, which makes everything sound like this. I like that. That was good. So yeah, that's the short form.
Was that a loop of Questlove, or was he playing the whole way through?
No, he very, very seldom loops his stuff, although in the records that they wanted to sound more hip-hop, what was before Things Fall Apart? Philadelphia Half-Life, yeah. Some of it, and I think some of the new one, because they wanted that more hip-hop sound. So, but generally, he plays all the way through.
Can I ask one more thing? How's your hearing? Like, saying you're live musician?
Great point. In fact, that was one of the things I wrote down. Just the way that I don't want to say this, I don't want to come off sounding preachy, but we all may do drugs, and we all probably have friends who've died from drugs. So during the course of your life, you kind of figure out what's good for you and what's not good for you, and as you get your shit together as a human being, you start to be able to live that a little bit more. It's the same thing with monitoring. Particularly for dance music, because it's really hard, because that's like how it's going to be heard. But try to moderate your listening levels. I have a reputation, you know, of when my clients want to listen to it cranked, I leave the control room. And I say, just call me when you're ready. You know what, it's also better because they can listen and not feel like I'll feel bad every time they go, oh, that's terrible, you know. And I don't feel bad because I don't listen to it going, oh, that's terrible. You know, I just let them listen by themselves. I do go up and down a lot, and that's important, between my own monitors and occasionally NS10s, which I can't stand, and then the big monitors in the studio. I'll go up to the big monitors every 15 minutes or so and crank the shit out of it for like, you know, 10 seconds, just to kind of feel what I'm doing to the bottom, and then go back to my monitors and listen at levels actually. The best way to listen, my monitors are these really old Genelecs called S80s. You can't, I think you can find them now. They're about $6,000 a piece. Don't bother. Don't bother. Find something that you're comfortable with that you know the mixes will translate well. And this is only a matter of trial and error. You know, you got to mix enough stuff at your house, listen to it elsewhere, listen to it elsewhere, listen to it elsewhere, and then make adjustments and say, wow, I know my mixers sound a little bright, my speakers sound brighter than they really are, so I'm going to have to make things in my place so it sounds too bright. It's much more important that you know your own rig than that you have a really expensive rig that may be, you know, quote unquote, more accurate. Very, very, very important.
What's the story with subwoofers?
Subwoofers, be careful. If you want to have what I call your fanny tickled, leave your sub on. But keep in mind that unless you have it adjusted right, you may come out of your studio with something that you think has plenty of bottom because the subwoofer is hyping it up, but then you get elsewhere and there's no subwoofer and you realize it doesn't really translate. I try to leave them off most of the time when I'm mixing. That way I know my speakers, I know the big Augsburgers at most New York studios, and I kind of know certain rooms. In some rooms I know, if I turn it up on the big monitors, I know the low end about 50 or 40 hertz will be a little flabby, and you guys know what I mean. It's just kind of like a little too much of that. But I know that the speakers make it that way, so I can leave my mix a little that way. Another room I may know that it's actually exactly the way it is, and if it's a little flabby, I'll put like a high-pass filter on the mix at 40 hertz or something like that. And there's another good tip. If you have EQ across the whole mix, chances are your equalizer does not have high-pass filters. For those of you who don't know, a high-pass filter is something that lets the highs pass. It cuts all the frequencies off below a certain point. An equalizer just pushes them up or down at a certain place. Most EQs, or program EQs, which do the whole mix, don't have filters like that. And you may be using a GML or sometimes a tube tech, which is very broad. Something you can do, if you don't have high-pass filters, is take the lowest band on the EQ, whether it's shelving or peaking, it doesn't matter. Turn it down to like something that's way out of the way, like 20 or 30 hertz. Now for dance music, that actually may be a consideration, so you got to be careful. But take it way down so it's a little below where you really want your music to start. Make it to a fairly high Q, which is a pretty tight band, and then roll it off. Now, one of the cool things with digital EQ and computerized EQ is if you do that, you can actually see what it's doing. And it will, in a way, act like a high pass. And where it comes back up again on the low side is so low that it really doesn't make any difference. So that's a great way to kind of fake a high pass filter. And it's important, when you do music that you really load up the low end, everything, now to dance people, because I see people nodding, is stuff below 40 hertz important? It is. Okay, that's a trip. That's a real trip. Usually below 40 and 30, I don't really, other than the fact that it's not really loose, I don't really care. But that's amazing. But anyway, with your bottom, it's very important that you pay attention to the ranges of the bottom. One of the things with a hip-hop record, and with two bands in particular, with Michelle Ndegeocello cello, because she may have 3 basses going on at the same time, a couple of synths and a real bass, or the Roots, because they may have 1 or 2 machine kicks and a Mears kick, you got to kind of divide and conquer. You know, figure where each low frequency element can have the majority of its energy, and then leave room for something else. Because if they clash, you're going to shake the room apart. When 2 low frequency sounds come together that are sort of in the wrong apportionment, you will, if you have big monitors, the whole room will shake, and not in a good way. You know, when every once in a while, when 2 kicks hit, it won't be consistent.
You're talking about EQing and maybe even compressing the whole mix. Isn't that something the mastering engineer is going to hate you for?
Yeah.
All right.
You know, you got to really use your judgment. The point is never to paint yourself into a corner, meaning never to put yourself in a situation that can't be undone. The same thing's about EQ and compression on tracking. I compress when I track now for several reasons. Number one, you're going to do it anyway. Number two, almost everything needs it in terms of how we are used to listening to music. Now, if I'm doing a jazz session, I'm real careful about it because I don't want to hear it. Otherwise, I do it so the thing sounds right. EQing, and you know, for years everybody said track flat, don't track with EQ, it's the best way. I could never get away with it because I didn't have enough technique nor the right gear to get away with it. Now I can actually get away with it most of the time because I have a lot of microphones, a lot of different mic pre's, and I use proximity as much as I can. By the way, for those of you who don't know, getting a good mic preamp will probably be the best addition to your studio if you don't have it that you can possibly make. It actually makes almost more difference than the microphone itself. And there's a big argument as to which ones are really good, but a good flexible one, it's a tremendous difference. Okay, the pre's on an SSL-G series or E series.
Oh, I'll go out and buy that.
No, they suck. They're awful. I think they're awful. But then going out and buying good, like I know Focusrite makes some very affordable, I shouldn't name names because whatever. Focusrite makes some things that are like under $1,000 that actually sound quite good. In fact, we're in a golden age of hardware right now. People are making two things right now that they didn't make for years. They're making emulations or copies of the old gear, which actually is much quieter, much lower maintenance, and sounds arguably just as good, and I say arguably. Number two, people are making a lot of very reasonably priced gear that really sounds much, much better. And the difference that a good mic pre will make for you is your stuff will sound very clear and focused. You'll hear the edges to the sound instead of something sounding like this, you know, and you got to really work to make it sound open, or actually more like this. It'll sound much more clear and open, and you'll hear the shape of the things. Mic pre, if you want to EQ your whole mix and compress it, just be careful. Less is more, and who doesn't mix mostly digitally here? Okay. Do you have a complex analog setup?
It's a Mackie 24 channel, pretty
Okay.
standard.
Do you recall do you take notes on your mixes?
No, I work very quickly and leave it
cool.
at that.
So you don't do that much. Okay. You know, one of the cool things about staying digital, and I'm one of those guys who get paid a lot of money to go to a really cool studio and play with a lot of great toys. So I shouldn't talk like this.
How much of these toys do you own, or how many?
I'm a gear junkie. If I had to buy all my gear all over again, it'd probably be $250,000. But most of the stuff I don't use and is worthless to anybody else. I have a bunch of old Neve stuff that I use less and less. Good studios are really well equipped these days. I also try not to buy anything. This is a good thing. If you do work in outside studios or mix in outside studios, don't buy what they're all going to have. It's ridiculous. In the States, most studios have GML EQs, which is a wonderful, very adaptable and powerful piece. I was going to buy one or two. They're $5,000 a piece. I don't need to buy it. Every studio I go into has them. Anyway, so now I use less and less analog outboard all the time, both mine and my studios. One of the advantages to digital mixing, which I don't do, but when I have done stuff for pre-production or for sales purposes, meaning let's do as much as we can, go out and shop the band, get a record deal, and get money to do it right. I have a digital console, an O2R, which is soon to be an O2R96, and I run Pro Tools with Logic. I run Logic Audio with Pro Tools. And man, you know, if you don't like something, you press a button and you change it. Instead of recalls, setting analog recalls are both a pain in the ass. You sound like you're a little more liberated than I am, because I'm like, I got to get it the same. I got to get it the same. You know what? You're right. Get it close and then make it better. That's the idea. But my point is, if you're working all digitally, you can experiment with doing some radical things to your master mix and listen to it a few times over the next couple of days, and it's cool because it takes you 10 minutes to change it, you know. So that's what I recommend with that. The other thing...
gearheads who would shoot themselves now, you saying, oh, go digital.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I said it has its advantages, for the quickness of recall. That said, I I never set out to be a better mixer in the box, and in the box means staying inside Pro Tools. One of the ways I've been working in the last couple of years that started out of Michel Ndegeocello's last record, Comfort Woman, which is both a great record and actually an amazing sounding record. And again, it's the luck of the draw. You go out every day, you do the best you can. Sometimes you listen to it later and you say, wow, that's pretty cool. And sometimes you say, man, that's, what the fuck was I doing? But anyway, that record is very full range. A lot of stuff going on everywhere sonically. Anyway, because her people have never been able to sell a lot of records for her, we didn't have a lot of money for the mixes. So I took it into my room, mixed it like for a half a day in my Pro Tools rig on each song first, then went up to the big studio, spread it out on the faders, put the faders flat, said, wow, it sounds exactly the same. And then went on to make something that sounded pretty good sound phenomenal. And that's something I've been doing the last couple of years now on all my projects. It aces me out of a little bit of money because I don't charge for my, sometimes I do, charge for my studio. I also take more time on the stuff and I get paid the same thing. But it's really, really nice because, gating the kick drum or taking I think I said this before, taking the cell phone out of the lead vocal at $2,000 a day is like, you feel like a jerk. So, do that stuff at home. If you're going to take it up to the big studio, do as much what I call shit work at home as you can. But no, I don't stay in the box. I'm not ruling it out. What I have found is, for my best mixes where I stay all digital, which I haven't released, this is only for like demos and stuff, I still come up about 20% short, 20 to 30% short of what I could do if I took it and helped it out with analog. But I will get better at it. It is the way things are going. I've never done anything out of a marketing or economic imperative. I do things to help people make better sounding records. But it is going that way. Most of the really big mixers I know are doing a lot of that because it's their survival. I'm doing it because I'm interested, and we'll see if it becomes my survival too. I don't know.
When you're talking big mixes, are there people where you really go like, how the heck did they do that? And whose sound do you admire?
A lot of people. And everything from a 1947 Charles Mingus record that may, on hi-fi levels, may not sound great, to, I'll use the example of a Barbra Streisand record, which to me is an example of hi-fi gone bad. I admire a lot of stuff. When people ask me to recommend other mixers, I find it difficult because people want what I do and other people do what they do, and they do shit really well. And at a certain point, it's not better, just different. There's a lot of people who do really good work, and it should be different. You pay a lot of money, and you should get something that's a little unique to that person. Just because someone has done a lot of big records, and you've seen their name a lot, and they happen to work in New York, London, LA, Nashville, whatever the big centers are, and they happen to have a lot of money behind what they do, so you see their name a lot, and they happen to be working with amazing artists, it doesn't really mean whatever they do is better or worse than what you do. So you got to make sure, keep your focus straight, stay focused on the music, and do what you do. And it's, there's a lot of people who consistently I admire their work, but
Is there a camaraderie amongst colleagues, or are you
Yeah.
just so sick of hearing stuff?
No,
when
no.
you finish with it, you don't want to talk about it?
Like, there's other mixers in me who are kind of friends. Like Tony Maserati and I are pretty close. I totally respect and occasionally hang out with Dave Pensato, who has a definite way of doing things. Those guys are a little too sort of, there's some things, I do kind of slicky hi-fi R&B things sometimes too, so I shouldn't say anything. But both those guys are really amazing. You know, John Gass, who did Babyface's shit for years. I mean, everybody's got a strength. If you really study different people's mixing, there's some people who you say, God, their background vocals are just like crystal. And there's some people you say, wow, the gradations of their low end are just amazing. Or, God, their high end is always so smooth. So, you know, everybody's got something. But yeah, we all kind of know each other. And for the most part, there's definitely a great deal of respect. You know, there's a certain point, and this comes with money. I wish I was there. But it comes with props. It comes with expertise. It comes with possessions. It comes with family, where you kind of got all you need. So at a certain point, there's not a, you know, I don't find a lot of people who are really, really good at what they do to be major assholes about, you know, their ego and how it's involved in it, because, you know, they got all that stuff. It's cool. So most of the, you know, high-end mixers, you know, we all kind of hang together. We're pretty cool.
So just because you got the power in the name already, you don't have to go on about playing power games all the time.
Absolutely not. And you know what? Everybody knows that that's not really necessary for most things anyway. You know.
Yeah, I was wondering, how does the compression with FM radio play affect how you mix, or is that an issue?
It's a great issue, and I actually, number one, I try not to pay attention to it when I mix. You gotta get tunnel vision. I mean, I sort of have the big picture in mind, and occasionally I'll do something, and I'll tell my artist, I say, look, because in mastering it's going to be blah, 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 so that's why I'm doing it this way. But you got to pay attention, you know, think about those things. But for the most part, at each stage of the project, just like I was saying when I play guitar tracks, I'm the world's worst engineer, because at each stage of the project, you got to kind of pay attention and get tunnel vision about what's going on right there. And I really hate to say we'll fix it in mastering, but for example, sometimes if I have the high end push as far as I can where I am, I'll tell people that. I said, look, it still needs a little bit of 20K, but you know, with EQs, those of you who know, it's not just, if you turn it to +3, +6 is not just twice +3. It gets into a lot of other issues. So sometimes, you know, you got to pay attention a little bit. For those of you who don't know as well, FM radio puts a compressor on their signal to try and make it seem louder. Bob Katz's new book called On Mastering, or I think Mastering Audio, is absolutely brilliant. There's not a lot of books on audio that are that good. Bob Katz, it's called Mastering Audio. He demystifies, for techies, he's totally there, but he also demystifies a lot of concepts about digital audio, headroom, and radio and compression in really, really cool ways. I don't buy 100% of what he says, but it speaks to that thing very, very, very well. And the classic example is listening to generally one of the hip-hop tracks that I might have mixed over MTV, and what happens when the kick drum plays. And every time the kick drum plays, the vocal goes in like this and then gets louder, goes in like that. What that is because the kick drum is so much louder than everything else, when the compressor hears that, it turns down the whole thing. That's kind of what they do. And then you lose everything else along with it.
In terms of what you just said about kick drums coming up and loud, what are your favorite, I don't know if you group a lot, like your tracks in terms of percussions and bass lines and stuff, what are your favorite groupings to make?
Whatever makes the mix easiest. Grouping is when you assign a whole bunch of faders to be controlled by one. Just makes life easier. I usually put all my drums on one fader, sometimes all the guitars, I mean on a master, all the guitars on another, all the keyboards on another, background vocals on another. And that way it just makes it very, very easy if you're doing complex stuff. If you're using a mixer that uses VCA grouping, don't do that. VCAs are a device on older consoles that allow one fader to control another, and they degrade the audio quality, especially the older ones. Like when I was really, like in the 60s and early 70s when I started recording, if you put stuff through a couple of VCAs, it would end up sounding like this. It just sounded like shit. So be careful if you use a VCA group.
I guess, yeah, okay.
Hi, I'm studying sound engineering, and from the beginning of the course, my lecturers and everybody keep telling me, don't work in a studio because studios are going down, all business is going down because of bedroom studios. Stick to broadcasting or post-production. Then I finally managed to find a job in a studio, and first thing they told me, don't do it, because it's long hours, we're not paid too much.
The studio told you that?
Yeah. Can you
tell people
comment
the same
that,
thing.
and can you give advice to somebody who wants to do that?
You know, I can't give advice, but I'll make a couple of observations. Everything you say is true. And if you're a musician and your ultimate aim is to make your own music, I would say take the money you were going to put into recording school, buy some gear, and learn how to use it. I don't have to explain that. Everybody knows this. And if you want to engineer for other people, whatever environment that is, it's a good idea to learn some stuff from other people. And I'm still not at the get a job in a studio stage yet. Okay, I'll get there. It's a good idea to learn as much as you can. At the same time, remember that the more things you know about everything in the world will make you better at what you do. But you should learn as much as you can about engineering, both from your own experience as well as from books and what other people tell you. As far as jobs in studios, that's a tough one. I get asked this all the time. You're absolutely right. Studios are dying. And this is another thing that I wrote down. There's no such thing as a tracking engineer anymore unless you're really, really good and you've hung out for a long period of time. Part of success and longevity is sticking in there long enough. There's a lot of people who are very good who've been doing shit for 2 weeks. There's a lot of people who are very good who've been doing shit for 20 years. You know, but you got to stick with it. The way, once you are in a studio, now, let me get to that in a second. If you're going at it from a more realistic point of view, and you want to look in an arena where there's more work and perhaps a better pay level, post-production, audio for video, audio for media in general is the way to go. And in a way that, you know, that's a growth industry, one of the few. On the other hand, keep in mind that it's so easy to do it yourself anymore. You know, most video editing programs and stuff have enough audio stuff going on that until you get to a certain level, people will do it themselves, and the editors will do the audio themselves, and it won't really make a difference if they have a separate audio person. After you get past a certain level of resolution, then it makes a difference. Live sound, there is work there. It's a really tough life. Yeah. I say something really funny. Besides the fact that you're never home, everyone knows this. Coiling up mic cables from a live gig gets your hands dirtier than anything I've ever done in the world. You could go to a car and rub your hands all over the engine. Your hands would not get dirtier than they do coiling up a cable from a club. So that's a hard life too. I'm trying to think. I mean, I know there's other careers, but the other thing is broadcasting. I consider that audio for video, but that's a more stable thing. Many times they're union jobs, but keep in mind, you go to work every day at the same time. You see the same people all the time. You're restricted, saying do it this way. Basically, you do things so they don't fuck up rather than doing things so they're really cool. So there's that trade-off.
Probably before you give you a little bit of a break and before we lure you off into the studio, you said it, I mean, you just touched upon the subject and you said it earlier on, body clocks are different. And I mean, yes, it might be really fulfilling to do something you really like, and a lot of us are really, you know, striving towards that or gyrating towards that aim. But how does it somehow interfere with a private life? Because I mean, if I would know as a wife of yours, you'd be in the studio with Erykah Badu until 5 in the morning.
I haven't gotten there yet with you, man. Nothing. Go ahead.
But I mean, you know, just from experience, I mean.
You can expect not to have a life if you work in recording studios for a long time. One of the things you become better at after you've done it for a while is how to finesse that. You still can't expect the normal things from your life. My soon-to-be ex-wife, Yeah, it is. If you don't know the details, it's hilarious. She blames that. She blames my never being around. You know what? That's bullshit. We knew this going in.
Give Tony the mic.
We knew this going in. She knew that I was passionate about music. And it's about how much, I'm going to stop on this really soon,
No,
but it's
carry on,
about how much guts to keep going that you both have and how strong you are to make the sacrifices that you need to keep your relationship together. But it really does make any kind of normal, it doesn't look like anybody in this room really cares about having a normal life. So, but that brings up an important point. It's important that you work on your skills at being a person and getting sleep and doing something other besides music and, reading, all that stuff. It's, it's very easy to leave your session, get fucked up and sit in front of the television and fall out. It's not going to take you anywhere. So, it's important that you work as hard at other things, as being in the studio too.
What would you say is like an average Bob Power day?
If I'm mixing, it's usually 10 or 11 a.m. to any time between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. At worst, 10 a.m. the next day. I always think I'm going to, if I'm way ahead on a mix, it'll be like 5:30, 6 p.m. It sounds pretty good. I get real excited. It's always midnight. And that's why this is a real rule. You can never schedule social things on days where you have sessions. Never. Don't do it. Every time I've done it, even with other artists who know what's going on, you'll never make it.
We're going to have to talk afterwards, man. I think
okay.
It's a different... But have you tried to ever get a balance?
Yeah, I do it right now. No, definitely. I'm 52. It's really important to have something going on in your life other than this, because that'll also help you bring things to your professional life. And everybody's a human being first. We're all like what we do second, and we try to lie to ourselves for a long time. And when you're working, you actually have to lie to yourself. But that's really the way it works, and we all know this. But
so do people in working at some car factory as well?
Yeah, same thing.
You're in a really privileged situation anyhow. So.
Absolutely, I'm in a very privileged situation. But life also has a way of teaching you lessons about things all over again at different times. You know how, sometimes you think you got something together and then something will come along that reminds you that you don't. And that's good, because it makes you keep rethinking what you do. Thing about running a session when you're an engineer, something I never used to be into or talked about, get the stuff going as quickly as you can. Get out of the musician's way. Make the technology transparent to the musician. Let them take their inspiration and run with it. If you have issues, if someone's running up on the mic and distorting the shit, don't stop them in the middle of the take. Tell them gently between takes. And if the stuff's distorted, then you know what? If it's a great take and it's a little crunchy, I've started to live with stuff, particularly as a producer, that I engineer that may be a little fucked up, but it's so good. But you know what's funny? If I'm mixing a track and someone else brings something in, I kick and scream not to use that material if it's a little nasty. But for myself, it's like, no, that feels great. So, it's just different things. But yeah, you got to develop that other stuff.
I guess it's in our all interest to give the man a big hand. It was really